Okay, welcome to Summoning Insight episode 4. That sounds familiar. Okay, we should have done it last week or like 2 weeks ago or something about TSM, but we're going to bump that. I'm Thorin. I work for On Gamers, journalist. If you don't know by now, get to know. MonteCristo here is a caster. He's pretty good. Probably better than Jat, actually, so take that to the bank, cash it. Anyway, start off on that note.
I'm not making such claims.
Okay, I am, so get at me, Jat. Anyway, I didn't even bring Freak into it. He's not even the same ballpark, as the miners. Right, anyway, we'll start the show up on a professional note. So like I said, we're going to bump the TSM chat, but we are going to talk about playoffs, LCS. So let's just go right onto we'll just start on a random game and then we'll work our way from there. So which would you prefer, Monty? Start on EU or NA?
I don't care.
It doesn't even care about NA. I'd heard about the reputation you had. I didn't know it was true. I always thought you supported America, but okay, we'll start.
I don't care where we start. I care about the results.
Okay, fair enough. Right, we'll start on NA then. So the first matchup, Dignitas versus Curse. So basically the two worst teams in the playoff playing each other. Almost. Dignitas versus Curse. The interesting thing is, where I would start this off is, this is actually one of the few almost mirror matchups that we have in the playoffs for the two regions. Because if you think about Dignitas and Curse, they're the teams where everyone in the beginning of the season who only knows the names in the lineup would tell you, oh no, the mid laners for these teams are all stars. There's Voyboy and then there's Skara, but then they turned out to basically just be average to bad this season. And so there's two star players for both of these teams, is the jungler and the AD carry. So we've got Crumbs and I'm a Cutie Pie, and then we've got I Will Dominate and we've got Cop. They're the two players who in theory have been the stars. They've been performing the best. Yeah. So I thought it was interesting that they got matched up against each other, because actually, to me, of the whole playoffs, I think in both regions, I think this might be the closest matchup where it's the hardest to call, I think. What do you think?
I think it is very difficult to call, especially because Dignitas, swapped out to their new mid laner, who it just hasn't been awesome, I guess. I mean, the other thing about it is I think that right now, I would give Curse the edge, honestly, because they have some unique strategies at times, and their theory crafting is generally okay. It's just their execution is often poor. I mean, we lost to them during Super Week through some very bad play, but they capitalized on our mistakes well. And then we totally crushed Dignitas. And that was a ridiculous stomping. But it depends on, I really think it really depends on who shows up. And like you're saying, I think for me, it's Dominate and Crumbs who are really the driving forces behind these teams and the star players. I think Cutie Pie and Cop are solid, but I think I think the success of these teams depends much more on whether Dominate or Crumbs have a good day than anything else.
I mean, that's the key point, though, because if it comes down to those two, I think Crumbs is having the better season. I think he's a much more solid player, and I think if you look at the way the two teams have performed, I would say it like this: if Curse is going to win this series, they have to do really well in the early part of the game. The first third of the game, they have to get ahead. Because I think otherwise, if Dignitas survives the first third versus Curse, then Dignitas is going to be the better team, I think, throughout the series. What would you say to that analogy?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know about that. I think that in terms of their gameplay, the problem with calling this match is that both teams are extremely poor when it comes to closing out leads and actually shutting down a game, and they typically make a lot of late game rotational mistakes. So I don't know. I think it's pretty much a coin flip.
I mean, I know during the season, Curse won 3 of the games, but I don't know. With both teams changing players, it's so hard to keep that as any indicative thing, And Curse had a brand new lineup at the beginning, so they could be even better than those first results. It's always hard to know with that sort of thing. So, if you had to call it, who would you be going for, and by what kind of score?
Oh.
Who does your gut tell you takes this?
Curse 2-1, I guess.
Okay, because I was gonna take Dignitas actually. Actually, while we're still on this topic, then one of the interesting things I've noticed is Crumbs over his career seems to be almost criminally underrated. Maybe because of the storyline of how his career's gone, where he's the one guy in the 3-person trade who everyone sort of wasn't looking at, because everyone was like, oh, Voyboy's going here, and then where's St. Vicious going? And then it's like, oh, I guess some other third guy just then has to leave a team, and then he goes over to Dignitas from Curse, and then he had that horrible period where he had to play the top lane instead of Voyboy initially in Dignitas, so it made him not look that good. But I remember a year ago, so in the split last year, when Dignitas were doing really well, he was like one of the main reasons I thought as to why they were doing well. Yeah. He was like a good junk. He doesn't have the sickest mechanics or whatever, but he's one of those players where it's like, he's like workman-like. Like his mechanics are manageable for what his skill set, but his strategical stuff, I think he's one of the better junglers in NA at strategical shit.
He's also, yes, I would agree. He's also, his personality is very laid back. If you know him, he doesn't really tilt. He's got a very measured, thoughtful analysis to the way he approaches gameplay. And personally, I think he's really, he's great. And he's also, he doesn't really have an ego. I would assume that, like I said, I haven't been his coach, but I would assume he's highly coachable. I think he's a really solid guy and a really solid player, and it's reflected not only in his gameplay but in his mentality if you meet him as well.
So another interesting thing about the matchup then, like I said, the two stars that you can really pick out with the AD carry, the jungler. So if we go to the AD carries, these are two people who never get talked about as like top AD carries. I mean, I'm a Cutie Pie maybe had that brief period, like I was saying, in the split last year in the spring split when they were on top and people had to credit it to something, you know. Like their bot lane was doing well then. What do you think of I'm a Cutie Pie now? Because, I mean, there was all those questions when Kiwi Kid was moved into support. Like, I mean, to me, okay, this might... I don't know if people think this is retarded, because I know everyone's going to say Sneaky's super good because Cloud9 are on top. But to me, if Wild Turtle and Doublelift are fighting over who's the best, then after them, it's definitely I'm a Cutie Pie to me.
Yes, I would agree with that. I would agree. The Cutie Pie's problem is sometimes he kind of goes rogue and gets super aggressive and goes off on his own and like randomly dies. Whereas Cop plays too passively. They're different ends of the spectrum in terms of AD carry, I think. Cutie Pie's not the most aggressive, but he can sometimes get a little wild.
No, I think that's a decent way to put it, especially because like both of those definitely carries a benefit and a flaw, essentially, because like it's a lot easier to not blame the person. What's funny is that this is a good like meta topic to discuss for a second. I've noticed in terms of fans, they'll always give more credit if there's two people who are actually performing identically overall, if you did the stats, okay, but one of them tends to go ham and just go like aggro in on everything he can, but he dies enough to even it out, and the other guy doesn't get many kills, but he stays really passive and he doesn't die much either, then people will always tend, if they're like casual fans, to give more credit to the guy who goes ham, because what happens is the few times he does go in and he gets like that kill you didn't expect, they think like, wow, if he just played like that all the time he'd be amazing. Meanwhile, they look at the guy who's actually playing very methodically and safe, and they go like, oh, he's boring, like he doesn't do anything. Whereas actually, it's possible, like we're saying now, for the two players to be on a very similar performance level, even though that's the case. What would you say to this topic?
It just depends on what a team needs. Like sometimes you need that playmaking AD carry that occasionally will die, but will also create very specific opportunities. And sometimes you have that playmaking ability in other positions. And so you need a more stable, safe AD carry that's there more as a turret sieger or as a supplemental damage during a team fight, but whose main purpose is just to provide what damage he can without dying. Like Bang from SK Telecom S is very much one of those type of carries. Cop is a lot like Bang, actually. Very similar players in terms of play style. So that's a good. It's just about who is the role player. Like, what are you doing on the like who is the playmaker on the team, and what kind of player you need, and how you're building a team around them.
No, I think that's a good analogy. I mean, I've always said one thing that I've always taken a lot of umbrage with is when people would try and suggest that, like, oh, don't worry, Cop is just the NA Genja, and it's like, no, come on, man, Genja has an insane upside once you get to the team fights, and if he actually like arrives at the team fight on time, like, come on, man, you can't just say he's like Cop, like, come on, the guy's like a world champion.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, we've identified the AD carry, the jungler there. I mean, I think you have to say that the real X factor is how the mid laners do. Because if it was Skara, even if Skara's not been playing well, I'd have said with his level of experience and going against Voyboy and even knowing a lot about Voyboy as a player, that's going to maybe even that up, and that's going to be like the X factor. Who's going to do better there? But that's actually one area where I do worry. Bearing in mind I've said Dig are going to win, which is like, even if Voyboy struggled, how is a guy with almost no experience gonna beat him in a best of 3 series? What is your take for that?
It depends. I don't know him personally. It depends on how nervous he gets and how much composure he can keep during a very high pressure situation like the playoffs. So without knowing him, it's hard for me to say. I don't think that Voyboy is at the top of mid laners in North America. So I think it's possible that Dignitas and Golden Glue can outlane him. This is a really hard matchup to call.
What is Voyboy's biggest lack then? Because you would have thought the one thing he'd be able to get down quickest was the mechanics, because that's what everyone lauded him for when he was at his peak with the Assassins. So what is the main thing that he lacks at the moment to make him at that level?
He doesn't know how to make plays out of the mid lane. He doesn't know when to roam. He doesn't know how to apply pressure on other lanes properly. That's just not something he's very good at yet. It's a very different kind of position. Top lane, we describe it as kind of like being on an island. And I just don't think he's adapted very well to the rotations and roams that you have to make out of the mid lane.
It's fair enough. I mean, there's that joke that like top lane just teaches you how to lane. That's like the way someone described it. Like you just have to be the one who lanes the best 1v1.
It's also the fact that his champion pool is really weird. And also Curse, I'm not going to say too much, but they do really weird stuff in scrims. I think they've given up on being like a meta team. Both Dignitas and Curse from CLG scrims with them. Sometimes I like think that they're just trying to cheese like all the time. The strategies they practice are just wacky.
What would you say will the patch change have any effect on this matchup, you think?
Probably. It's going to have effects on all the matchups. I can't really...
What type of player does it favor more? Does it favor like an I will dominate, like aggressive type of player? Does it favor someone who might like be more laid back, just go farming for a while more? What do you think?
You can do it either way. That's the thing, is that with Feral Flare, you can, if you want to, go and have a farm jungler, and if Crumbs wants to do that, if he's confident in his lanes. But also, if you know somebody's going to be a farm jungler and you play an aggressive jungler, you have a lot more of effect on lanes and can maybe start a snowball with a couple of kills in your lanes. So it's really dependent. I do think that it opens up jungle to a variety of more interesting styles and itemization. So that's really exciting about this patch, actually. What's not exciting is heal and how everybody's using it. I've seen as many as 4 heals in a game, in a pro scrims.
So what's interesting is, before we go off this topic, actually, at the beginning of the season, I'm guessing a lot of other people had the same reaction to me when they heard Kiwi Kid was staying in the team, but he was going to support now, which was like, oh, Dignitas has their own Zuna, cool, and that's going to be terrible. But since the Curse guys have a brand new player themselves at support, I think that probably almost evens out, which probably tells you my opinion of Kiwi Kid, that I think like a brand new player, like, oh, they're even, yeah.
Yeah, but the thing about it was he wasn't really playing support up until that point. So this guy, Bunny Fufu, coming out of solo queue as a support main does make sense. And to Kiwi Kid's credit, I think he's a much stronger support player than he was a top laner, and I think he's adapted relatively well to the position.
Doesn't he get help, though, in the fact that we just changed to the support meta, where it's a bit more forgiving, perhaps?
I don't know if it's more forgiving. In fact, I think that the way that support itemization works now increases the mechanical burden on supports to use items properly and to make decisions properly. I think that having a strong voice as a support, in fact, I don't know how comm works on their team, but one of the great things right now is to have one of your main shot callers be your support, just because they're the primary engagers. So if Kiwi Kid has found a more vocal role with the team, it could be helping them out as well.
Okay, right. I think that's enough about that matchup. So let's move on to the other one, which is, I suspect you might have some bias on this one. It's CLG versus Coast. Now listen, regular season went awesome, right? 4-0. Even with not even the real lineup, which is like a bad sign. But what's your initial impression?
I mean, I obviously can't say too much about this, so it's going to be a kind of one-sided discussion because I don't want to reveal too much. But Shifter is a very good player, and throughout our time scrimming with them, playing with them, we can keep the rest of that team down, but Shifter can have like 10 kills in a game. It's ridiculous. Like he's really, really good. So you can, the thing about Coast that's different than playing Curse or Dignitas is there is this guy on this team that can like hard carry his team. There's not anybody on Curse or Dignitas that individually you're terrified of in the same way that you're scared about Shifter. So it's dangerous, right? They're dangerous. And 4.5 will have some more carry tops, so it's worth being a little nervous about Zion Spartan as well.
No, I mean, I think that's the way it goes, actually. That's the funny thing, though, is that Shifter is in no way the X factor for Coast, because actually you can almost be sure he'll play well and he'll do well. It's just that it might not matter, because really what we've seen, if you look at any of the stats breakdowns for Coast, is that whether they win or lose depends on whether Zion Spartan shows up or whether he's just an okay or average player. If he turns up and he's carrying and he does great, that's when they have a chance to win and they can beat anyone potentially. But Shifter's going to do well every time. So I'd give the analogy of like, in the NBA, you have these certain players. Like, I'll give you an example now. In the current NBA, on the New York Knicks, Carmelo Anthony is one of the best scorers in the whole NBA, right? But he can score his 30 or 40. But as long as you shut everyone else down, it doesn't matter. He gets his 40, you win by like 10 points overall in the game. You're like, well, fair enough. You had a great game. See you, mate. But if someone else on the team scored 30 points as well, that's when you'd be worried. So I think that's this series in a nutshell, which is that Zion Spartan has to carry. Otherwise, I don't think it's even possible for them. I would already have them as an underdog, but I think that's why I don't think it'll happen over 3 games. To ask him to carry 2 games out of 3, we just haven't seen it happen during the season. Like, if you actually saw some of his stats, his KDA, we've got a stats piece that just came out today. His KDA was actually slightly below what you'd expect it to be. Only slightly. But that, when you consider he's having huge games when he is on, that suggests that in the games where he's not on, he's doing so badly or so average that it just doesn't even end up mattering overall.
Yeah, but that said, I looked at your stats article today, and a lot of CLG's members have lower than average KDAs, but that's because we're a team that's mostly focused on objectives and rotations, and we'll sacrifice kills to take towers. You know what I mean? Sure. So we tend to have lower KDAs, but we also tend to close like games really quickly and all that other stuff. So KDA isn't everything. That's what I'll say. But I think the other thing that's interesting about the Coast matchup is that due to teams, each individual team using up to 4 heals and almost always using 2, the top lane has become the easiest lane to gank. And I don't think Nintendo is really up to the task of shutting down or ganking a top lane 1v1, if there are even 1v1s. Obviously, standard meta now, due to the trinket changes, is 2v1, because it's too dangerous to put yourself into a delayed invade situation in a 1v1 right now. It's basically coin flipping the early game if you go into a 1v1, so nobody wants to do it.
So actually, what's funny is Coast actually perfectly fulfilled the scenario I was describing, the metagame context, where I described COP and I'm a Cutie Pie, where the few games that they win, they'll look so great because they're being so aggressive and all these wild, impulsive moves that people are going to want to believe, like, oh, if that Coast turns up for 2 or 3 games, they could win. But, like, I will never bank on that sort of a player unless you're really, like, that good that you can do that all the time. Like, I always think that that happens, like, 1 out of 3 times, when it's those sorts of people it tends to happen.
Well, the other thing, too, is that a lot of the time when Shifter does hard carry them, he's playing an assassin. And Shifter on assassins is not really going to happen. In fact, we're probably not going to see very many assassins because of the exhaust changes. Make it really, really easy to shut them down. Okay. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I have a lot of confidence in my guys, obviously, to make it through.
In fact, I'd even describe Coast as the old CLG. So think back on the old CLG, okay? Occasionally can beat the top teams, guaranteed to then lose to the bottom teams, making them have a crap record. Losing record overall, despite some great games over the season. Jungler doesn't even appear to be on the map. One player carrying a lot of the time, and it still doesn't matter. And if you get to 38 minutes, then they'll lose anyway. Like, this is the old CLG, but I don't think it's possible that they beat CLG here. Like, I think CLG just wins 2-0.
I hope that's true. I hope that's true, Thorin.
Like, to me, this is the one definite walkover here. Because even if I see Coast win a game, which I actually don't think is going to happen, I don't see them winning the 2 out of the 3. That requires a bit of consistency. Admittedly, I mean, here's one thing we can maybe just go on to before we go into the rest of the topics. Best of 3. After we've had to wait 28 games per team, A whole 11 weeks. Why the fuck are we watching best of 3? Meanwhile, the amateur finals has like best of 5s. So watching some dog shit, like players who aren't even necessarily going to be in LCS play best of 5s that last like 12-hour broadcasts with people having small talk between.
It's also not only that, but I totally agree with you. I think best of 3s is absolute horseshit. But going into especially the 5th place match, because that actually decides who goes down to relegation, having that also a best of 3. I mean, these are really important matches, and this can literally decide whether somebody gets kicked out, and it's, for the next basically 8 months, right? Because if you get relegated now, you don't even have a chance to play in the LCS again until January or February. So I think best of 5s are much more fair. Here in Korea for the OnGameNet playoffs, starting in the quarterfinals, we have best of 5s. Like I just don't know what to say about that. I think it's silly.
I mean, just think of it this way, okay? I was saying there Coast is pretty unlikely to win the CLG game. Let's say Coast just have a miracle 2-day period, right? Where they win 2-0 over CLG, but like the closest games possible, and they just absolutely narrowly edge it, and they get through somehow, and then they just do the exact same thing to TSM. Boom, they're in the final after just 4 games. That's ludicrous. And not only that, so the whole season you were shitting the bed the whole time, you're right near the bottom, and now you just get to go right into the final. Cheers, mate. See ya.
Yeah, and not only that, but for my team as well, we worked through 28 games. We were 18-10. Coast was 10-18. We had a +8 record on the season on them, and we could face a relegation after 2 best of 3s. That doesn't make me too happy.
Actually, here's another point. While we're just on the structure that I made in my article about like the problems that, let me think. Okay, when I said that teams didn't care, one of the reasons why I said it was unfair the way that the playoffs worked, that I didn't see many people pick up on, but I think it's a big deal, is that, okay, so in the NHL and the NBA, when they do their playoffs, there is no bye. Well, the key thing about that is, okay, they think they're giving the teams that get a bye an advantage, okay, because, okay, you're definitely not getting relegated, you get to go to the second round, but what they're actually doing is making it easier for the worst playoff teams, because they play teams that are less hard. Now, if TSM got to play Curse in this first round, and Cloud9 got to play, TSM got to play Coast, rather, well, now Coast has almost no chance of going through. And if it was a best of 5, that's like, well, guess what, Coast? After such a bad season, here's your reward. You get the absolute best... Oh, it'd be Cloud9 they'd be playing. You get the best team in the whole league, and you get them over a best of 5. You're almost definitely going out. Whereas now, even though CLG are the third best team, you have like a better chance for sure of going through than you would have otherwise. Like, do you see how unfair that is? You're actually giving the worst teams a benefit almost for the system.
Well, it's only because of the relegation that's true, right? If there was no relegation,
well, that's why they give them the bye, so that because they don't want like Cloud9 to potentially go out after the 2 games.
But like you're saying, yes, it gives an advantage in terms of relegation to Cloud9 and TSM, but it also makes it easier for Coast and the worst teams to avoid relegation at the same time. Like
same thing. That's the problem. It's like you've sort of created a problem that didn't necessarily exist and then created the solution to it, which happens to be what you wanted to do anyway. Which, let's face it, is the Riot method as far as I can tell, Nothing from MonteCristo on that one. He's just political.
I don't know. I really don't like... What the hell, man?
You take that hot potato back, man.
Shut up. I'm always vocal about how much I dislike Riot's formats. I don't know what you're talking about. I never like Riot's formats, though I do think I'm going to like the one for Worlds this year, so...
Oh, teaser. Just drop that right there.
I assume will be the one for Worlds. I don't know. They haven't officially announced it, but based on putting together a bunch of evidence, it seems like it'll be good.
Okay. Right, let me think. Okay, so before we move on from NA here, so we did these 2 matchups. Let's see. Let's just talk about hypotheticals then. So, depending on the teams who go through, let's do it this way, since obviously we can't definitely be correct on the predictions. For the 2 teams in the semi-final, like, which one of Dignitas and Curse matches up best against Cloud9?
Neither. Cloud9 is a rotational-based team. Both Dignitas and Curse fare very poorly in terms of rotational-based play.
Yeah, that's what's funny, actually. I think Cloud9, it looked like it wouldn't matter who came first or second, okay, because TSM and Cloud9 both had such good records and they were both doing so awesome. You're like, well, they clear-cut the two best teams. This actually helps Cloud9 have the chance of getting to the final way more, because what's funny is whichever team won out of CLG and Coast, at least would have had the chance of having that puncher's chance and just going crazy and Shifter goes ham or Doublelift goes ham and somehow then they just knock them out in the best of three, you know. Whereas I think, come on, Dignitas and Curse, that's almost like who gets the honor of getting soundly beaten strategically by Cloud9.
Well, the thing about it too is, in my mind, right now, Cloud9 is probably the favorites coming in, not only because of their record, because TSM just hasn't looked as sharp in the last couple weeks in terms of their play and their rotations, whereas Cloud9 is still very technical. And so I think they have the advantage going in. The other thing that's funny is that with the giant divide in teams, the fact that Cloud9 was able to take first means that they dodged CLG in their bracket. And also, here's the other thing that people don't think about is that also it's about practice partners for playoffs. Because the thing about it is that by having CLG in the opposite bracket, whoever was in the opposite bracket, either TSM or Cloud9, got CLG as a practice partner because we can't meet until the finals. In fact, on my TV over here, there's a scrim going on right now between CLG and Cloud9. So, you know, we get to scrim them, and Cloud9 gets the next best team as a scrim partner, whereas TSM, doesn't get that. So
yeah, that's the way to say it. They just don't get that. Okay. Well, TSM basically gets to be like that boxer who just has to like shadow box and just punch the bag all the time. It's like, imagine that was a real opponent, dude.
Yeah, exactly. So there are multiple advantages. You don't get the obviously more powerful team in the bracket, considering the regular season results, and also using your own eyeballs and brain. You can tell that TSM, CLG, and Cloud9 are kind of much better than the rest of the field in North America right now. But so having him in the opposite bracket, really important. So that also gives C9 a pretty big advantage. So yeah, I anticipate them to easily 2-0 either Dignitas or Curse.
Now, with that said, it's almost stupid for me to pose the same hypothetical for the other side of the bracket, because if Coast somehow beats CLG, I can't see how they are possibly have as good a chance of beating TSM as CLG does. That's ridiculous,
maybe.
Right?
Yeah, I just think that even if they beat us in a best of three, like you said, you don't see them being consistent enough. But even on the outside chance that happens, I definitely don't think they're consistent enough to win 2 best of threes in a row like that. That's crazy.
Right. If CLG plays TSM, I realize you want to put on your optimism hat here. You want to channel all those good feelings. You want to believe that Doublelift will stick to the script. You want to know that Dexter's going to do his ganks. You want to believe all this shit. But come on, Monty.
Yeah.
How certain are you that would happen if they play TSM?
I think we have I think actually, given the state of both of the teams right now, we have the best possible chance over the course of the season that we would have against TSM, just because I think TSM is in a little bit of a slump and we're looking okay. So
now, does that even it up to like you being a slight favorite, being 50-50? Where is this in your mind?
I give it 50-50.
Okay. I don't think I'd go. I'm not going to be that brave because, again, I don't want to sound like some sort of cynical like banker who waits until like there's a recession and then he just buys up all the stocks really cheap. Like, ha, you fools. But I will always bank and bet on people who have a history of sort of like slipping up, of them doing that in like the big moment. Like until it's proven otherwise, I'll always say,
fair enough.
If it really comes down to it, I feel like that can happen enough.
Yeah, fair enough.
Now, and plus TSM is good enough that it's not like they have to play the 10 out of 10 level every game to win. Like they can just play some okay games and still edge those, So I think TSM's a decent favorite. Now the interesting thing is though, yeah, let me think. What would be the X factor in that sort of series? Do you think CLG and TSM? What would you put it as?
I honestly think it's going to come down to the performance in the 2v1s. That's what I think.
And which lanes will be 2v1? Do you think?
No, just the 2v1 mid top, because that's like standard meta now, and so that's all about rotations. And I do think that CLG has an edge on TSM when it comes to rotation. So I think the meta game is also favoring CLG right now. personally. But, there are ways to force 1v1 and 2v2s, and maybe they'll have some level 1s planned or something like that. I don't know. It's really hard to say, and I can't really talk too much about what I'm thinking about that matchup because obviously it's on my mind, and plans are forming. So,
I mean, the area where I worry as well is that TSM has all the firepower in the world at every position except jungler, basically. So in the top lane, Dyrus can win that lane. He can definitely do equally as well and just go even if he wants to. He can win that. Okay, bottom lane, CLG have this awesome AD carry. They have that's the only team in the whole country that has a player who's like almost equally as good or better. It's very debatable. So there's not really much of an advantage at your best position there. And then the part where I really worry, when I said before how I always bank until it's proven otherwise on the player who does good sometimes, but sometimes he's not as good. The problem with a lot of the CLG results I see is that, okay, here's a good way to phrase this actually, because we didn't go into this topic. One of the interesting things about that stats article was how terrible High's KDA was compared to what would be expected of a team who'd won so many games, okay? Because if you remember, I've said this a few times on this podcast before, at the beginning of the season, the hypothetical was like this. So if Bjergsen comes over and we know he's a really talented EU mid, is he just going to beat everyone in NA? And initially, the conversation went like this. Okay, no, ManCloud can potentially be as good because at the time we were all still on post-Worlds XDG. But then the other thing people have always said was, no, don't worry, because High will also be like competing with him for the title of best NA mid. I mean, that's just dead and buried. That was dead and buried a few weeks into the season. So the reason why I bring this up is because basically, except for when he plays Bjergsen, I actually think Link has an advantage in the mid lane on every other team he's played. So everyone else, in theory, he can be better, he can win that lane, he can win out completely. But I think when he plays Bjergsen, that's the one guy who's better than him in this position in NA. So that's where I worry a bit.
But CLG has the better jungler, so that's the thing about it. Is it's all about that jungle mid synergy and what you have going on there. So it's interesting. Bjergsen is also a player that has thrived on assassins, and that's not really going to work in 4.5. So he's going to have to mix it up in terms of his champion pool a little bit. And Link traditionally has not really played assassins, so.
So that gives me a way to frame this then, because, okay, I'll give you that. Obviously, I think that Dexter is the better jungler over the odd one in certain areas. But I think overall, if you had to draw a line through the graph, yeah, you'd say he's better, okay. But here's the thing. In that scenario, if they really want to, they can just do like Reginald odd one style. Just like odd one, just make sure that Bjergsen wins mid lane. We'll leave Dyrus to himself, because that's the thing. It's not like Neon Tonso is just going to lane bully him out and just wreck the top lane. That's where I worry, you know.
Well, but that's assuming the 1v1 and the 2v2, which, like I said, it's unlikely to happen in any game in 4.5. Okay. It's just not meta. 2v1 is now meta because of the trinket changes.
But I mean,
you're way too scared, and especially in the playoffs. Here's a reason: is especially when the game is on the line and you have this like playoff mentality, you are trying to minimize risk, and the trinket changes at level 1 make it so risky to 2v2 and 1v1, like stupidly risky, because the possibility of you getting delayed invade and like having an even matchup are so dangerous that nobody wants to do it. It's really scary, actually. They need to fix the trinket shit.
Oh, I actually didn't think to say this before as well, but that's actually what's interesting as well, is that that's another way that Cloud9 won out by getting their side of the bracket, be Dignitas and Curse. Because, okay, I've just said, to me, like, I Will Dominate and Crumbs have been two of the better junglers this season. They're going against the best jungler in the whole region, and he's having, like, a monster season again where, in theory, he's going to like outperform them massively. So again, that's like another area where even one of the few positives for Dignitas and Curse seems to get taken away.
Yeah.
I mean, if Meteos wants to do the old Meteos style and farm up and just become a monster, isn't Feral Flame like the perfect time for him?
Yes, it is actually.
It's hard to see. Yeah, I can't see them winning that. Okay, so like that's NA. I think we've done enough about NA there. Okay, actually, just as a hypothetical, if you had to pick who goes into the relegation from this region.
That's a fun one, actually.
Because that's where it's interesting. Because listen, Coast had the worst record, but they could beat Curse or Dig.
I don't think Coast is going to go into relegation. I really don't. That's the funny thing.
Well, I mean, you've picked
I guess
Curse to win.
Curse
so
to win.
Yes, you're going to have
So
to go
I guess I'm
Dig,
going to
yeah?
pick Curse. I guess I'm going to have to pick Curse.
Dig, you mean?
No, I picked Curse to win, yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess I'm going to have to go Dig, yeah.
I'm going to do the same thing, which is just the team that I think loses that, which I was going to say was Curse. I think Curse go out. By the way, what a shocker that would be if Curse goes out. Like one of the biggest organizations, the most money. In theory, they should always be stacked with talent, you know. And I mean, by the way, they have to go into relegations. It's not like they're necessarily immediately going out. They also get the worst team to pick, you know. So actually, I think. By the way, here's one thing to say. I think whoever goes into the relegation in the 5th place just gets back in.
Oh yeah, they're going to be fine. I wouldn't really worry if I was them. I mean, obviously they're going to be worried because the threat is real, but it's not like they're going to be facing LMQ. And LMQ, you know, the thing about LMQ that's scary is that all the pro teams practice with LMQ, and we have been for a long time. CLG scrims against LMQ all the time, and we don't really scrim against the other amateur teams. So they've had a lot more opportunities to get better than the other amateur, like challenger circuit teams.
One thing that's funny, actually, is that when people talk about LMQ, one of the big mistakes they've made. Here's another reason, right, why I don't like the Season 3 style, where you only ever play internationally once over the year, is that I'll tell you from my experiences with the Counter-Strike, when there was a period in time in Counter-Strike, okay, when the Europeans were by far the best region, okay, and North America the game wasn't as big there anymore, and in general they had way less players, way less sponsors, way less teams, and so they dropped off from being a superpower in CS, okay. But what would happen was, because they didn't have very good sponsors, they could now only attend like 2 events per year, and because they'd be so spaced out, it meant that when they attended, their chances of getting an upset were way higher, because the teams who were really, really good don't have experience playing them. And that's part of being a great team, is that when you play the other bad teams, but on a regular basis, you figure out every style of how to beat them and every way to counter even what their small edges are. But if you play a team only once in a year and they come from a totally different region with a totally different metagame, now it's like the upset is actually way more likely. So what's funny is a team like LMQ, the fact that they've dominated so hard in the amateur scenario, obviously they just lost this I don't know, they won like 3-2. But the fact that they dominated from the very beginning on tells me that they must be a really strong team. Because I would have thought, actually, when they initially got to America, it would be like a Quantic scenario. Like, initially, you need to adjust. Like, oh, we've never played so many teams who do these weird styles, and the individual players are different from our region, and we have to adjust. But actually, they've just been, like, fire the whole way from the very beginning, you know.
Well, like I said, they've had the best practice partners that the region could offer as well. And they haven't had any problems finding scrims with the pro teams here. So they've got that advantage going for them as well. And you have to remember that, you know, Godlike was playing in the World Championship this last year. He's seen literally the top level of competition that League of Legends offers. So it's not too surprising.
What's funny, though, is the reason why I'm actually excited to see LMQ get into LCS is that 2 of the positions that they have are 2 of the positions in NA that are a bit weak right now, which is mid lane and AD carry. They have like 2 players who are immediately going to be in that conversation for like the best players in the region or battling with those top players. And again, we won't have a scenario like this where I'm like, oh, they've avoided the one person who could have been a good mid lane. Like now there'll be another one we can add in for both those positions, you know.
Well, also, XDG not getting in would free up some players to change teams, which would actually be very interesting. I think it would actually, honestly, I hate to say this, and I don't want to insult XDG or any of their fans, but I actually think that XDG exiting the LCS would be the best thing for the NA scene overall, because it would free up some of XDG's players to go to other LCS teams, and actually XDG breaking up and going into some teams, and I'm not going to say which ones because I don't want to get into it, but if you just think about who's good on XDG, and then you think about some other NALCS teams, and you think about what if this person went there, it would actually strengthen the rest of the NA team.
Well, no, I just said the mid lane's weak. Well, listen, Kozek Smithy hasn't done that well since he came back to jungle, and they never got that synergy back again. People think that ManCloud is shit now. ManCloud isn't as good as he was the last season, but overall, he's been a steady, actually. He's been one of the only people in that team who still managed to do well and battle through it. And like, if he goes to any other team in LCS, that team gets way better, in my opinion. Like, he could potentially become one of the top mids again. I think that's for certain. What do you think?
I think that both he and Xmethi are very good players.
That's another thing. Smithy just needs a new team.
I think. But if you think about the NALCS teams, I think he might have some options.
No, he's got tons.
That's what I'm saying.
Sure. That's the thing, though. In that sense, actually, I think of XDG in the same way I think of Millennium. I'm actually hoping they get knocked out because I'm like, come on, let's get Creaton and Kevin out of bad teammate prison, guys. Come on, let's send them to somewhere they can play. And it's the same scenario here. I want Smithy on a good team. I want ManCloud on a good team. Also, by the way, it's a good thing to actually not have the talent too spread out. That's always been a problem, I think, that both LCS regions has had, which is that you have certain periods or certain splits where the talent's too spread out, and it actually makes it, even though you're making the games closer, it makes it not as good because you want the best team. Like, I want it to be where the top 2 teams in NA really are like top 8 in the whole world, and I want it to be like that for all the major regions. So we're getting the absolute best team in NA go off to play the absolute best team from Korea, best team from China. Whereas if you dilute the talent too much, then whoever just wins like the close battle to be the best in NA is then going to get smashed if the team in Korea who's the best is the absolute best there. Like that's where the disparity is going to really screw you, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we saw that with EU last split where it was way too close, and so as a result, you could have. Listen, 1 or 2 games went differently. It could have been Nip and Alternate and, you know, all these other teams going instead of it. And then where would they have gone? They wouldn't have got to the semi-finals of Worlds.
Yeah.
So let's go to Europe then. We've gone on to that. Now in Europe, here's the funny thing. I'll start it the same way I started the other one, which is that I said Curse versus Dig is a great matchup because it's a mirror matchup because we've got the AD carry jungler synergy. Now Roccat Gambit is the same thing again because now we've got the jungler mid synergy. These are the two stars for the 2 teams, right?
Yeah, definitely. Although, you know, a lot of people still really like Salaber and Vander as well. But I think that Rockat's on its way down. And again, we've talked about this on the show before, but Gambit is a clutch team. And they're going to come through here. They're going to come through. I don't really have too many doubts. I think that this matchup, you definitely have to favor Gambit. Yeah, it's just, that's it.
Now, listen. People are going to go, whoa! The regular season record was 3-1 for Roccat. But come on, first of all, bear in mind one of those games that Gambit lost was with the subs. Right. So immediately that's like 2-1 for Roccat.
And Gambit won the last time they faced.
Yeah, that was the last one. And that's the other thing. Like, people think if you say these comments, so you say, come on, it's Gambit, you know, they always finish top 4 with this lineup, like they always clutch in the play, they always peak to the playoffs. People think that you're being nostalgic, you're being like a fanboy, you're thinking it's like season 2. No, we've seen it every single time now. Even for this IEM, remember, they weren't doing that super great before that. They came along.
There was, people are silly. There was one tournament in Gambit/Moscow 5's history where they didn't make the semifinals. And that was Worlds Season 3. And
that was with Voidal. That's the key thing.
One tournament. One. Okay? They're going to make it. Like, Roccat, I think, has... I need to go on a rant about Europe. I don't get Europe. I don't get the picks and bans. I don't get their Heimerdinger top. I don't get their Talon picks. I don't get what they do in picks and bans. I think that the European meta is so weird and that these players are so focused on outplaying people in lane and having secret counter picks at the moment that they lose sight of the big picture of team play. And I actually think that the top NA teams are better than the top European teams right now because they understand macro strategy better. So there you go. There's a bold opinion for you.
Okay, but I have to now quantify that. When you say the top NA teams, you're talking about 3 teams from NA, yeah?
Yes, only 3.
Okay, so you're saying CLG, Cloud9, and TSM are better than the top European teams at macro strategy. So now I have to ask, who are the top European teams?
Yeah, exactly. That's the hard thing to ask. And I think that the playoffs are going to be very indicative of that. I think that honestly, if I look at these playoffs, I think SK and Alliance have the best chance of winning simply because they play meta. Like, they're not... I mean, although, to be fair, we don't really know what meta is anymore because of the way that everything shook out. But we've got some pretty good ideas. But at least they're not playing Varus and Heimerdinger top, and that's not going to be a thing in 4.5 either.
Because here's what's interesting.
They're not trying to, counterpick Ziggs with Talon. It's just ridiculous.
See, this is actually where people are going to expect, because people, if you've had it yourself. People will expect that I'm gonna like say no, that's bullshit. How could NA be better than it? Because that implies NA is better than EU in any sense, which it doesn't, by the way. It just says the best teams in NA are better than the best EU teams. Here's the thing, though. I think that's actually correct if you break the teams down team by team. So let's go team by team, right? SK top in Europe at the end of the split. Okay. Now, SK, I think, is the only exception to that, because to me, SK is like a European Cloud9.
They are, exactly.
Good strategy.
That is a really good
rotations.
Good rotations, intelligent picks, like well thought out strategy.
So I've started with the exception there to prove the rule, which is okay. So take SK out of the equation for a second, because they're as good as or better than the NA strategical teams. But here's the thing. Now, when you look at the next 3 top teams, I think your point is exactly on. Because, okay, Alliance are like the gods of laning. And then now they've gotten better after the laning phase. Now they've got, but they're still not super amazing strategically. That's not there.
No, they're not super amazing strategically. They are good in the laning phase. And even though they've gone more meta, they still have some oddball picks at times. But it is noteworthy that Froggen talked about this. But when they started turning their season around at that Super Week around the time of IEM, Froggen went back and like talked to the rest of his team, and they started adopting more like Korean meta picks. And especially because you remember, like at the time, Sivir wasn't very popular in Europe, but was incredibly popular in Korea and North America as a priority pick. And they started like catching on, and then they started winning. So I think that Froggen identified some strong picks from looking at some international competition, and then translated that very well. And then they started improving their rotations. They improved in a lot of ways at the same time. But yeah, I don't think that Alliance is as good in terms of macro strategy. And that's what wins right now. And it's so important to have good macro strategy in 4.5, again, because of the 2v1. 2v1s discount the laning phase entirely, and you're relying on your decisions in terms of macro strategy after that. So it's a little bit of an oddball. I don't know if maybe the Europeans will have some sort of gentleman's agreement to 2v2 and 1v1 in their playoffs. It's going to be interesting to see how that happens. But it's certainly not the best strategy at the moment.
No, that's what's funny, actually, is that that's a possibility. You have to even get that.
It is definitely
because that's actually the thing that basically would be your knock on the European scene. Okay, like if you were to look at all the great, we all know about the great mid laners Europe has. Okay, the weird thing about them is, it's true they have better mid laners than NA, and some of their teams might be better. But what's bizarre is in NA, if you know that you've got the worst mid lane matchup, then you go, or in Korea, you go, well, okay, let's not play mid lane 1v1 then. Let's play 2v1. Let's see how they do versus our bot lane there, you know. But instead, in Europe, they just go, well, I mean, yeah, he is Froggen, but like, I'm Xpeke, so maybe I could win. Let's just see how it goes. And then they're like, fair enough. Yeah.
Europe is so wacky, dude. Like, it confuses me so much. It really does. It'll be interesting to see how the top European team does at All-Stars this year. It'll be really interesting.
The great example to give for that scenario is we all know Xpeke is one of the great mids of all time, okay? Incredible mid player, has some amazing performances. But the way people criticized me saying that KTB beat Fnatic and criticizing Xpeke's IEM was I said, you know, Ryu did so well against Alexich and against Xpeke in that tournament, and they were like, hey, that's not fair, because in this game he didn't even play versus Xpeke, and they just 2v1'd them, and then they just won that way, and they made it sound like that wasn't like, that didn't count or something. I'm like, you know, those games still win, you know, yeah. It's like, that's like their mentality, whereas it's like, no, that's actually KTB winning, because they were like, oh, Xpeke, you have a good champion matchup here? You don't even get to play it versus Ryu. We play someone else versus you. So that shows the difference in mentality, you know. Actually, Fnatic couldn't take advantage of some of the things that they had going for them there, whereas the Koreans narrowed it down immediately, like, oh, if this guy always just plays 1v1, well, I think we already know how to own him in pick ban phase.
Yeah, we'll just then reuse Lulu into a side lane in a 1v1 versus their top laner. Like, it was very smart of KT Bullets. They're very good. Korean teams are very good at identifying win conditions and where they're strong and where the enemy is weak, and then immediately adapting. That's what they're good at. That's why they're the best. And I think that NA teams are also better than EU teams at doing that, with the exception of SK.
So to close out that point then, okay, so the last two teams that I would have picked as the potential top European teams are obviously Gambit and Fnatic. Well, come on. Who in the world's going to tell us that Gambit and Fnatic have awesome metagame strategy? Like, macro game strategy almost killed Fnatic this season. They were, like, heading towards 10 losses in a row, guys, because they couldn't figure out how to win no matter what.
Right. And they also canned their management, which I think knowing their management and knowing how professional they were at Worlds is odd. Maybe something weird happened there, but I thought it was weird that they did that. And then they went back. They picked Yorick during Super Week. I mean, like, what are you doing?
Come on, it's Slas, bro. He's like, that's like a get out of jail free card. Every season he's allowed to play Yorick once. Okay.
And at Worlds, he lost to XDG in the first game of Worlds because he picked Yorick. He ruined my prediction. After I saw York, I was like, "Can I change my pick, guys?"
That was just a devious plan, though. That was actually Fnatic wanted NA to fall. So what they did is they gave XDG that early win. So then XDG still got dumpstered. They still got beaten by Ozone and everyone like that. And then XDG were like, "Hey, maybe we can keep this Psycho Sid guy. He seems all right, actually." And then we see how that worked out. So. The very clever plan, Soaz. You were a devious man. I didn't think that far ahead, you know. I thought you just were an idiot.
With American region, that's hilarious.
So
yeah, I don't know. So Fnatic, I think Cyanide has also had a very underwhelming end to his season. Unfortunately, he's a very streaky player overall, in my opinion.
And then to finish that point, no one can say Gambit has amazing macro strategy. These guys do, I've said this before, and people think this is a slight. I'm actually saying it like sort of as a minor disadvantage, but also as like a strength, which is that there are so few teams in the world can just intuitively play off each other, that have that level of team play, that level of so many years together that they just know what the other guy's going to do and they understand the flow of when to do it. That's only bad when it doesn't work, which in Gambit's case in big tournaments isn't that often, okay? Over a whole season, now, yeah, maybe they have slumps and etc. But that's not macro strategy. Gambit, like if you here's the thing, Gambit's one of the best teams ever, but if you sat them down and you did like a scouting report, like we were watching some VODs, me, MonteCristo and Gambit are sat there, and then we just pause the game at certain times and tell them like, and ask like Edward, what are the win conditions for the team that's slightly behind here? Like what would they have to do to win? I don't think he could tell you, mate. Because what he would do in Gambit and what Gambit would do wouldn't work for that team. Like his plan of like, well, we can stay 3k gold behind, but then when there's like this dragon fight, then what we have to do is like engage at the perfect time. Alex Ich hits his ultimate, comes in just after, kills 3 people, and then we win the game. It's like they can't do that.
No, right? They're like the dangerous feral animals like hunting on instinct. I think, but it works.
No, it does. That's the thing. Listen, they're the only ones who can do that, but they're so good at it that it's like it works. Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, we've summed up
another team that I would put in a similar vein, but I can't actually think of one that performs.
Let's think of one. There must be one we could come up with. So mainly instinctive style like that. I mean, okay, people might not like this example because it's not perfect, but I used to think of the dominant TSM in 2012 a bit like that. Their team fighting could help them out of trouble so many times.
Maybe OMG.
The old one?
Yeah.
No, they had that same sort of like...
Maybe old OMG. I don't think
explosive
new OMG.
team fighting style.
Like last year, 2013 OMG.
Well, they were definitely a team that was like... It was less consistency and more like flow style.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through the matchups then. So we've got Roccat versus Gambit.
I say Gambit 2-1.
Yeah, I think Gambit definitely takes this. I mean, part of the problem as well is... I mean, we made this point on... We had a whole episode, anyone who didn't see this, where it was dedicated to Roccat and why they've sort of fallen down a bit and why their peak was maybe a bit overblown. Here's one thing I'll say to start this topic off. Don't use that line just because they're all Polish players, that Roccat is the new MYM and they're just going straight out of LCS and everyone figured them out and all you had to do was... Like, it's not that bad. They're not MYM. They're not like they had a one-trick pony and now that it's figured out, it'll never work again. That's not true. It's more like they're where they should be. They should be around, like, battling for 4th, 5th. That's about right for where they are. But the problem for them is, I think Gambit's record over the season shouldn't be as bad as it is. And I'm going to justify that now like this. First of all, they had to play the 2 games with the subs. So that immediately there's potentially 2 games they could have lost that would have made their record bad. They won one of them amazingly, but they lost one for free to Roccat. That puts them down. Then you had the scenario with the travel backwards and forwards and them adjusting to the new gaming house. And then there was
they've
the
had
game.
a lot of logistical problems.
And then they did win a game over SK, but that game was revoked. So immediately you add all these things up, and Gambit could have been in the 4th spot here or in the 3rd spot. That wouldn't have been. You wouldn't have to change much to make that happen, right?
Yeah, agreed.
So in this matchup, who is the X factor for Roccat? Who has to play really well, and that gives them the chance to win?
I think it has to be Xaxis if he has champions ready. That's the thing, is that top lane champion pool is going to change a lot with 4.5. And if Xaxis can adapt quickly, then maybe he can overcome Darien.
Okay, that's worrying to me that you would say that, because when I looked into all the Roccat games, Xaxis' champion pool was one of my concerns. And it only got hidden before because no one's ever going to waste their bans on all the top laner when it's only playing like Renekton and stuff and Trundle, and no one's going to do that. But now, if we change to this meta now, listen, people talk shit on Darien. He is a bit of an idiot, and he's not as good as people think he is when he has good games. But listen, in Europe, he's very rarely getting beaten 1v1 by top laners, you know. It's usually ganks or him just overextending that costs him the game. He's not just getting owned 1v1 in lane, so I can't see how they're going to win that top lane matchup in a best of 3.
Yeah, it does seem that. But you asked me what I think had to happen for Roccat to win, and that's what I think has to happen, which I don't think is a good thing for Roccat, but I do think that would be the one thing. Oh,
and the one thing we didn't mention, actually, was that whole thing about how Gambit said they had this secret weapon, which I guess from what's happened is like them having an analyst for they said that they have an analyst for the boot camp. So good. If anything, that just strengthens. The only thing that could be a downside is, unless he was trolling yesterday, well, today for Americans, Edward did this tweet where he said he'd broken a finger. So I wonder if that is real, then that could play a factor, obviously. But then again, first of all, he didn't say what finger. Like, if you broke your little finger, you could still play the entire fucking... and it's on your keyboard hand, you don't even have to use that fucking finger. And it's League of Legends, dude. You still have to kind of make that adjustment, though, and that can be hard. No, but it's not like StarCraft where you got like 100 buttons you press all the time. Like, you could just keep that finger off the keyboard. Although one thing that was interesting was, if you looked at the stats, here's a perfect stat to show you what I was talking about Gambit, about this incredible intuitive sense, which means that they can still just come back from behind. Every other top team who's in the playoffs in Europe, okay, had like a really good stat or a decent stat for like how often they get first blood or how often they get first tower. Or if you went and looked at Gambit's stats, their stat for how often they got first blood was something like 23% or something insanely bad. So that means more than 3 out of 4 games, they just give the other team the first kill, and yet they still are winning a lot of these games, you know. That's gangster. That means you were really good in team fights and making your own fights on your conditions, you know. Who else could survive if you did that? That's actually pretty sad. I wasn't aware of that statistic for them. It's nuts. Okay, so we got the Roccat Gambit one there. Alliance versus Copenhagen Wolves. For me, this is the equivalent of... It's funny, the playoffs have gone quite similar here, because for me, the Alliance Copenhagen Wolves is just like the Coast versus CLG one, where I can't see how Alliance doesn't win this one. I think Alliance is definitely on the up and up, so I'm liking them here too. Although, you know, Amazing, I think Amazing is the bright spot of the Copenhagen Wolves. I think he's like a really solid jungler. But yeah, I don't see them kind of making it out. They're probably also going to get into relegation as well, I think. The big problem I see for Copenhagen Wolves goes like this. Their biggest strength all season has actually been their bot lane. And the problem is, okay, Alliance isn't the team with the superstar bot lane, okay? Their star player is the mid laner who's a super beast, and then in theory their top laner can be pretty good sometimes. So you'd think, oh, it's a mismatch. It's one of those scenarios where it's like, does your strength, your bot lane, win so hard that it beats out our top lane and mid? But the problem is that doesn't really work with Alliance, because again, it's not that their stars are at the bot lane, but their bot lane's perfectly surfaceable. Their bot lane can be fine against almost anyone. So I actually think that it almost neutralizes the one advantage for Copenhagen Wolves. And then, let's not fuck around. Young Buck also needs to stop playing Heimerdinger. That's a thing that needs to happen. Well, here's the other big problem. We would already say that Frogger would win this mid lane matchup versus almost anyone. But come on, with the meta now for mid lane, he's going to murder Coutard. Amazing had better be on his 100% perfect gank game, otherwise it's over in mid lane, right? Yeah.
I think that yeah, I think it should be fine with the Young Bucks champion pool recently and his kind of off meta picks. He's going to be particularly vulnerable to 2v1s, so that's going to be a little bit interesting. There's a reason why the top lane meta is as it is, because top laners are capable of doing well in both 1v1 and 2v1s, and with 2v1 so strong, we keep going back to that. But you're going to see like that every game in 4.5 probably. So.
Like one of the things that I thought people here's one of the funny things. You can never give a player credit for being improved as a player when he just happens to have the meta in his favor now. You have to wait until the meta goes away and then see how he does to figure out what his consistency level is, okay? So I think Copenhagen Wolves and Super Hot Crew were two of the teams who really benefited from the meta earlier on in the season. And so one of the reasons I say that is because when I think of Moops and I think of Coutard, I don't think these guys are particularly good mid laners, but I think like the Gragas Ziggs era was like ideal for them. That was like the best chance they had, and so as a result they were doing okay in some games. They were doing fine. Now as we go away from this, they're going to struggle.
Ziggs is still good. Ziggs is still good, but Gragas is going to be unavailable due to the rework, so that's not going to be an option.
So I can't see how they possibly win this. Like I just think Copenhagen Wolves has to lose that. I think it's going to be...
Yeah, I agree.
I could easily be 2-0.
I think it's going to be 2-0 Alliance.
Now, here's the curious thing. When I talked about the way the NA playoffs went down, I actually think that this playoffs is kind of bad also for the team who finished second. So TSM has to play CLG, and in that scenario, CLG has a better chance of beating them than they probably would have of Cloud9. I think of Alliance. Dude, I might even put Alliance as a slight favorite over Fnatic.
I say Alliance is a 55-45 favorite against Fnatic. That's my opinion.
I think Alliance is going to the finals here.
I think it's SK Alliance in the finals.
Whereas what's funny is, SK, if they'd have had to come second, now you're worried if you play Alliance, because sure, you might be strategically better, but they have got all the firepower. They can just blow you out the water. Doesn't even have to get to the rotations time. They can just beat you in lane, etc. So I actually think this is... I'm kind of concerned for Fnatic here. Like I actually think they're going to lose to Alliance. Oh, fuck.
I agree.
I just realized. Okay. Now on the other side of the bracket, Gambit play SK. Now that's just a sexy matchup. I want to see that. That will be a fun series, don't you think?
I think it will be too, because again, we go back to that would be the instinctual style of play versus the very calculated style of play. And it's always so fun to see that. That's why one of my favorite matchups in all of League of Legends is Gambit versus KT Bullets. Because of that reason. Yeah. Like it's KT Bullets are so technical. I mean, this is a team that is thinks on the fly better than almost anybody else. And if we look at the KT Bullets at the moment, and for a long time, they haven't really had those like truly like outstanding playmakers, and they play a very passive bottom lane, but they still like come out with very innovative strategies and very good on the fly decisions. So that's why I always like the two times we have seen Gambit versus KT Bullets have been some of my favorite League of Legends games of all time. So I really like this best of series if we get to see Gambit versus SK, because to me, it's very reminiscent of that.
And plus, what worries me there, okay, is if Roccat gets through, I don't see how they possibly beat SK. I think SK just grinds them down. Now, if SK plays Gambit, I think that's like a guaranteed. That's either like an instant classic, like a KT Bullet style. Yeah, it's only 2-0, but both games are really fun. Or it's a 3-game series. That has to be. I think the advantages and disadvantages match up enough there.
I think it's really going to be a good series. I'm very much hoping that happens.
Because what's funny is I think that bracket actually gives Gambit a decent chance of making the finals, even if they haven't somehow resurrected back to classic Gambit form. They could potentially make this final, I think.
Well, and you never count out the Russians when they boot camp, man. They always come back strong when they've had a week or two to get their shit together.
Actually, one thing we didn't do for the other league was do who would win the hypothetical final. So for this one, we'll do that now. Your hypothetical final, based on what you said so far, is SK versus Alliance. So SK versus Alliance in a best of 5, who wins, Monty?
That's going to be hard. I'm going to go with Alliance. I'm going to stick with my preseason prediction that Alliance would win this split and go with Alliance. So I seem like
doubling
really
down.
Smart.
Yeah, well, you're always going to do that, man. It's like, dude, one of the things that killed me was since OMG had to play Royal in Worlds, if you remember, there was this LoL Esports gathered all these like expert opinions, and I don't know why they added me in there, but they did. They added like these experts. Okay, so it was like me, Freak, Alex Penn, all these people, and all the email said was pick between 2 and 4 of the favorites for this tournament. Who you think will win the tournament? And so I picked SK Telecom and OMG, and I thought I'd be like tricky and only pick those two, so that then when one of them made it there, I was like, see, I was so confident they'd do it. But then what's sick is my third pick obviously would have been Royal Club, because,
of course, yeah.
But I thought to be tricky, like I thought, okay, all OMG has to do is not play Royal Club, and then they're going to get to the final. So I won't pick Royal Club. No one else on the other list picked anyone Chinese. They picked like fucking Fnatic and Cloud9 and stuff. So what's sick is if I didn't even just put Royal Club in, I'd have also had that like genius stats, like wow, he's the only one who saw it coming. Like, but it's the same scenario here. Like, when I've looked at that Alliance team, they either had to be one of the biggest failures ever, or they had to figure it out eventually. There was just too much good shit in that team. It's the same with Fnatic when they were losing all those games, and we were like, who do you cut? There was almost no one you could cut. So the solution is they just have to figure out something within the team, and once they get that, they're going to be a good team. Now, will they be the best? We don't know in terms of Alliance and Fnatic, but they would be good. It's almost impossible to be bad with those rosters, I think.
Yeah, I agree. But I think there's a slight edge to Alliance here in this Fnatic matchup, and Fnatic they're just so streaky. Like, that's the thing. And the thing about Alliance is that you could say, oh, yeah, well, Alliance lost all their first matches, but they've been doing really well ever since they figured out how to operate as a team. And they've been very consistent. We didn't see the big winning streak, big losing streak, blah, blah, blah. We just saw a losing streak as they were a new team, and now they're consistent. So I like them right now.
So here's the thing. I'm actually going to agree that I think Alliance will win if they play SK. Because actually, I think that's where... Here's the funny thing. If Alliance had been on the other side of the bracket and they had to play SK in a best of 3, I think SK's chances go way up.
Yep.
But now, come on, I just find it hard to see how some of the skill matchups can win out for SK. Like, they're going to need some genius 2v1s and picks to win the series. Because otherwise, I think just... How do you catch up when Alliance has that much talent, you know, and they're going to have that many players doing amazing? And plus, like, your one weak point on SK is the mid lane. And that's the guy who's going to have, if he has to play 1v1, is the most pressure on him. This is the best guy maybe in the West in the mid lane.
And that's also the lane that you're most likely to get that 1v1. You have to make a very special strategy to deal with that at the current time. So, yeah, I agree. And as going back to NA real quick, I think the current meta favors, and basically TSM's current position favors CLG over TSM. So I call Cloud9 CLG finals, Cloud9 wins.
So, like, personally, I picked TSM would make it. Here's the interesting thing, though. It's going to sound like this will... I'm contradicting myself now, because based on the logic I just used with SK and Alliance there, it sounds like the same scenario. So, TSM's this team with all the firepower. They don't have to be the perfect macro strategy team, but as long as they do decently well enough, they can win out over everyone. Cloud9's the SK-type team over there. And I think Cloud9's a little bit weaker skill-wise than SK is. So it sounds like I should say the same thing, Monty. It has to be TSM. How can they not win? I think Cloud9 is going to beat TSM if they play in a best of 5.
Oh, Cloud9 is going to beat. Yeah, definitely.
Like, people are going to think that's crazy because based on my logic of what I said before, like, it should happen. But I think Cloud9 wins that. I think the difference is that it's not that they're going to win like on pick bans or any of that shit. Every time I watch them play, they're like the reverse of Gambit. So when I watch Gambit play and I see them do all these mistakes, I'm always like, that's okay. You can still come back. Like, you can still win this. Like, it's still going to be fine. As long as you're not like 7k gold down, and as long as one guy hasn't completely had his lane snowballed, Gambit can still do it. They can still get the 2 fights in a row, and then the dragon that comes after that brings them back in the game, okay? When I watch Cloud9, it's like the opposite. I'm watching them play in games they're losing for the first part, and I'm like, well, they should definitely lose now. Like, if this team here just plays conservative, doesn't take any risks, just keeps playing, how did they get back in? They're not going to do some crazy skill thing here. And every time the rotation is just like outmaneuver the other team, outmaneuver them, pick them off, get the right fight.
The reason I think your logic works is that, yes, you're comparing them in terms of style, but also Cloud9 is much better than SK is in terms of rotation. They are the best macro
They're polished
team in
as
the
fuck.
West.
That's the thing. They're so polished.
They are the best macro
You
team.
can rely on that every game. That's the thing. If TSM beats Cloud9, it won't be anything to do with how Cloud9 played. It'll be how to do how TSM play. If TSM just play above the rim, 10 out of 10 level, then okay, they will win that series. But if they go a tall below, then it's not like both teams go down and battle down here. Cloud9 just stays there and TSM dips below their level and Cloud9 just wins. Like for me, I know what I'm going to get from that.
They're so consistent in their intelligence as well. So I have a lot of respect for that team.
It also has to be said, right? People think that I was just hating on Meteos when I used to say this, but after Worlds, there was a legitimate discussion you could have over who actually was the best jungler in NA. It wasn't just like, oh, Meteos had the MVP season, he's definitely the best, because it came down to this. Do you favour the Korean low econ heavy gank style of Xmithy, who was doing that quite well for an NA player? Do you favour the carry style of Meteos? And then you'd have all these other hypotheticals like, well, what would happen if Meteos was on a different team with strong laners? And what would happen if Xmithy had to play the carry? Now, it came down to personal preference there. Which did you think was better overall? There was a real discussion to be had there. Now that discussion doesn't exist anymore. Now Meteos is by far the best jungler in NA.
Well, he has adapted his style. He doesn't do that heavy farm style as much anymore. He has more presence in the lanes than he used to. He's not taking like 2 blue buffs in a row like he used to or doing any of that shit. But I mean, I was probably Meteos' most vocal critic in terms of that, where I said it's working in NA because you guys have such a strong stranglehold and you're steps ahead of everybody else in terms of the macro game, but it will not work when you compete internationally against teams that are as good as strategically and who aren't handicapping their laners as much.
Well, you saw it in the Fnatic series.
This isn't because I think Meteos is a bad jungler. I think Meteos is a great jungler. I just think that he needed to adapt his style. I think he has adapted his style, and I like him a lot more. I think he's a much more versatile player as a result. So,
well, just look at the deciding game at Worlds versus Fnatic. Okay, their style they were so far behind in the lanes, they were losing the whole game. If his whole style is all I do is farm, and he was on Nocturne, remember? Yeah, well, then he farmed a lot of creeps, like the joke. That's all he did, because he was just like, well, all I do usually is just farm, and then I'm going to own the game late. It's like, yeah, but you were down 20 kills to 1 at that point, so it was impossible for you to win. That's where that style fails. It doesn't work in that scenario when versus the super laners, you know, who were ahead of you, really.
When you're Cyanide had pretty good Worlds overall, but when you're facing top tier junglers from other regions who are mechanically able to make extremely good plays on your lanes and you're farming, you have to be able to match that pressure. Otherwise, by the time, like you're saying, you get around to being strong, the rest of all your lanes have lost. So then you just lose.
So one thing we didn't...
Man, that game was like, I think that was the ultimate nail in the coffin, bringing up that game 3, because I watched Meteos and I was like, okay, you're a 3k HP Nocturne.
Yeah.
But you can't do anything. And I was just sitting there being like, well, this was predictable. You know?
No, that was almost like Fnatic gave us like the perfect laboratory experiment of like, this is when this style will not work.
Yes, it was perfect.
Now, one thing we didn't mention actually was in the potentially Fnatic Alliance series, if that happens, one of the things we had a hard time earlier, when we did that whole episode where we broke down Fnatic and we were trying to figure out like, who would you remove? You can't remove anyone. I actually think now it's become clear that if you had to remove someone from Fnatic, if you had to make a change, it has to be the jungler. It has to be Cyanide. I mean, his whole thing he used to make his living off was almost like odd one style play, where it's like, okay, mechanics, don't worry, you're not as good mechanically as some other people, but you always have like, you're always in the right lane, you're always giving the right pressure, you're always helping your beast top laner and mid laner get where they need to be, okay. That's where I think he's fallen short. I think the fall of Xpeke is, first of all, Xpeke is really up and down style anyway, but then as Cyanide's fallen off, you've seen Xpeke really fall away. It almost reminds me of the ManCloud Xmithy drop away.
You know what was interesting? Just to go back, because I feel like that game 3 between Fnatic and Cloud9 so perfectly encapsulated. It was such a good test, and like you can learn so much about these teams from that one game, right? Remember, Cyanide picked up that first blood at level 1 in that game.
He picked up 2 kills in a row, if you remember.
Yeah, he got 2 kills. And then he really played the jungle quite poorly after that.
No, because if you remember, he was on Lee Sin, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was on Lee Sin.
The guy you're supposed to be making the plays on, making the pressure.
He didn't create any pressure. And he also he really didn't do anything. He could have solo Dragon with his early Razors, and he didn't do that. And he didn't create plays on the lane. He just kind of farmed his own jungle. It was really weird, actually, that he did that. And I remember I was sitting there with Crepo, and we were watching him play, and we're like, why isn't he doing anything? He sometimes, I think, doesn't play aggressively or risky enough. I think if he gets a lead, he plays it too conservatively. And I think that's a lot of the problem over there.
So, I mean, the one hypothetical that doesn't even seem worth discussing is if Copenhagen Wolves wins and they have to play Fnatic. I mean, Fnatic wrecks them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Now, who goes into relegation out of Roccat and Copenhagen Wolves?
Wolves, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the problem was... Okay, here's the way I described it over the beginning of the season. I don't want it to sound like I think I knew everything, because I don't actually know enough about the in-depth strategy reasons as to why teams win and lose. I just have a sense for things once I've researched them. Whenever I saw Super Hot Crew and Copenhagen Wolves do well or decently during the season, I never could look at their games and go, they're playing amazing now. I just looked at their games and I was like, what's wrong with Alliance? What's wrong with Gambit? What's wrong with SK? Like, once these teams get it going, Copenhagen Wolves and Roccat and Super Hot Crew will stay at the same level and they'll just get overtaken. And so I don't think it's that Copenhagen Wolves were awesome at the beginning of the season. Now they've dropped off and they're doing really badly. I think now what's happened is the rest of the teams just got their shit together, and now Wolves is where they should be. They're like sixth best team. Now listen, they're better than Super Hot Crew and Millennium. I'll give them credit there. I think they get straight back into LCS, but I think they have to be the sixth best team because I still think Rockat's better than them.
Yeah, I agree. I think Roccat has at least shown some decent consistency and should be able to take that match.
Oh, I've got a little idea of something we can do here. So, in the NBA and the NHL as well, they vote on the MVP just on the regular season. So let's give our MVP for NA and EU. Who's your MVP for NA?
Ooh, that's tough.
I already know, and people are going to be shocked when I say this.
That's tough.
I mean, listen, every fanboy is going to say Bjergsen, right?
Right.
Is that the obvious initial answer?
You know,
like, who else is coming to mind for you?
Meteos.
Yep, that's what I was going to pick. I'd give it to Meteos, dude.
Shifter, honestly.
Can he really have the MVP though?
Yeah, he can't because he was on a losing team, but I mean, definitely deserves a look. Yeah, I think Meteos, honestly.
Yeah. No, I think amazingly. I would have thought. Listen, up to about 3/4 of the way through the season, I would have been certain Bjergsen has this in the bag. Like, there's nothing they can do wrong now.
But then he left, and TSM kept winning. That's why I say no.
And plus, the difference is, Bjergsen could have played 75% as well as he did, and they probably would have won nearly all those games that they did anyway. And he wouldn't have been bad. He'd have still had a very good season. But if Meteos plays even 90% of his level, and in Cloud9 lose a gang of more games, maybe 3, 4, 5 more games, that'll really be the difference. That's why, to me, he's the MVP on like the literal definition of most valuable player in the league. You know, to his team, obviously, in that context. Okay, so for EU,
I think there are some other cases you could make for players in terms of performance. Obviously, Bjergsen's up there. I think that either Dexter or Afro on CLG would be contenders as well.
I think EU's the most open and shot one. Come on, we all know who it is. Who's it, Monty? Who do you think it is?
It's Froggen.
It's Froggen, obviously. And this is the reason why I say that. Okay. It's because it's easy to say it's Froggen now when his team was doing super well and they had those great 3 or 4 weeks in a row. But actually, go back, because this is why I had a sense that Froggen hadn't dropped off. I watched all the games they were losing when they were doing really badly. And in terms of just what he was individually doing, okay, some of his team-oriented decisions were wrong, but his actual play was still fire. He was still doing great work. He was still doing awesome laning. He was still doing everything perfectly. His level, even in the games they were losing, was really high. It just fell off in a certain way that he just had terrible roaming, terrible decision-making on what to do once he had kills or once he was in a scenario to go and fight for something. That's when he had problems. So once he fixed that, his already really good performance, now he's the best. He's the best player in Europe.
I honestly wonder what Alliance would have been like. Early in the season, they tried out N-rated, and they went with Nif. And Nif is a good player. But I actually think that for Alliance, N-rated was the player they needed to get their big picture strategy together. And I now wonder how good Alliance would have been if they had N-rated.
I think that puts them clear-cut number one. Actually. I think that would be they would be the number one by far.
Yeah.
Because then you would add in that missing component of the real shot calling that's going to be good there. And also, listen, you're not going to have the problems that you have with some of the players in the weird picks if you have someone like N-rated involved there.
I think that Alliance really missed the boat because they were used to working with N-rated because he had done some analytic work with the team, and they didn't make Worlds, so he went over and was the analyst for Lemon Dogs. But they used N-rated a lot in the last split, so they knew him personally. They got along well with him. And I think that probably what happened, I don't know for sure, that his mechanics, because he hadn't been playing in a while, his mechanics were not top tier. And I think they overvalued his mechanics and undervalued him as a role player on that team. So I think that was, I'm not knocking Nif either. I think Nif is great. But I think that for that team and for their needs, because you have to look at what kind of a player is, what kind of needs you have. And that's what we were really doing on CLG during our offseason, was saying well, we have these options, but what exactly are our assets? How do we want to focus this team? And I think we put together a good team given what was available.
Well, no, that's also why I can't entirely knock Alliance though, which is that here's what I think happened. I think you're right that it was the mechanical component that in the scrims N-rated didn't look good enough. Okay, but here's the problem. I think that it was not getting onto Alliance and then sort of having SK as his sort of last chance saloon that made him get the mechanics back in order.
Yes, that's true.
That's why I can't entirely blame them.
Yeah, you can't know that for sure.
And you have to realize, here's a factor that people told me in interviews, which also makes sense. Like we said this actually, maybe we said that on the podcast that was never recorded. One of the reasons why Alliance couldn't fix their problems is that even when they were losing all those games in the first weeks, they were owning everyone in scrims. So every time they went into practice, right, let's fix this. Oh, we just won again. That was 20 minutes surrender. Oh, well. So how do we fix our late game problems again? Well, we never get to the late game. We're just owning. They had some ludicrous scrim record. Everyone said, they're beating. That's why what's funny is when a team drops off and they start doing badly, and they used to be filled with good players, other pros will always jump on their one opportunity before a Froggen gets in a good team again to be okay, yeah, see, he's not as good now, and now they're dropped off, and that's sort of when they get their blows in. Okay, I've got a chance to finally say I'm better than this guy. Nobody said shit about Alliance. Everyone was no, they're still quite good. I think they'll figure it out. And every mid laner was no, Froggen's still the hardest to lane against. He's still, even when they were losing every game. So it's come on. I think everyone except the public got to know that they were heading in the right direction at some degree,
Yeah, also just from my personal conversations with Frog, and I know what his thoughts were about that team and the creation of that team, and he's just an extremely driven player. I mean, he practices a ton. He plays really hard. He loves the game. He never gets bored with it. His one flaw is that he's very stubborn. Yeah. Too stubborn at times, but
especially meta-related stuff.
His work ethic is incredible. And so if you know the guy and you know how serious he is and you know how he thinks about the game, it was clear that he was going to be able to put together a pretty good team.
Well, let's face it, the team that he put together, his logic was, I want to have the team that can potentially win Worlds from Europe. That's what I'm going for. I didn't even get to Worlds last time with EG, and I put up with the fact that, okay, some of my players mechanically had dropped off and we weren't as good as a team, but I believed, okay, maybe sticking together and keeping this team, maybe we have a Gambit-style scenario where we'll just pick it up when it comes to the playoffs every time. He saw that didn't work, and he was right, fuck it, I'm going on the drawing board, scrape everything off. Now I'm just going to build a team. I'm going to get the best pieces I can. You saw he didn't get the pieces he wanted, remember? He didn't get the initial pieces at some of the positions, but he got the next best that he could. And he said, right, that's the best I can get now to have a chance for me to win this split, go to Worlds, and potentially win the World Championship. Now, whether that'll happen, okay, his gamble paid off. And it was a gamble, but that's something that I want to bring up as like a point. I think the community should always be held accountable when they really hard bandwagon against or for someone. I don't like this thing where 2 weeks later, they all conveniently don't say that anymore and they change their mind. And then they all retroactively do that thing of like, Taipei Assassins, we're always going to win the World Cup. That sort of logic. That's what they've done with Alliance, okay? Because what happened was, if you remember those first few weeks, there were people taking almost like a perverse pleasure in the fact that EG won that first game in NA and Alliance did so badly, and they were like, see, you kicked out the real shot calling people because you were biased against them not having your mechanical skill. But now what have you got, Wicked and Frog? And all you've got is mechanical skill, mate. You won't go anywhere. No. Let's have a look at that EG team. What a wonderful season they've had with their wonderful shot calling. It's hard to shot call yourself out of like never being in a game. And then now you look at Alliance, they might win the whole fucking LCS EU, had an awesome last stretch. It's never as black and white as that. Especially when what people were doing there was almost assigning like a moral component that doesn't even come into the game, like just look at the play.
And I make predictions for fun because I think that it's fun to make predictions.
No, it sucks to never. That's the thing. That's why I wanted to do this show as well, is we will always give predictions, okay? Yeah, even if we give the analysis.
I think it's fun because we can make a prediction and talk about why we think it's going to come true. And of course, we're not going to be right all the time. But I predicted that Alliance would win before the EU LCS split started. I predicted that Quantic, which turned into Cloud9, was the best team in NA before they had even played a game in the LCS after I saw the qualifiers. And even though they weren't going against the best teams in the LCS, it's my job in my life to know League of Legends, and I could see these guys were a cut above. And I thought I saw that with Alliance as well. But as soon as Alliance started losing, like the hate train of like, Monty can't make predictions. Remember, I was the one who won the prediction contest at Worlds. Like I predicted Cloud9, before they had ever played an LCS game. Like I think I'm decent at this. And just people are like, oh, you suck at predictions. Like, Alliance is terrible. Why they ever? I'm like, just calm down. It's a long season. Give it some time. And maybe Alliance won't win. Maybe they'll go out in the quarterfinals. But still, they're definitely a team that is improving very rapidly.
So when I said that's part of why I want to do this show, because one of the things I think really suffers in terms of analysis in games like esports games is that the casters don't want to be wrong, okay? So they won't give you, they will, if the game is really 55-45 or 60-40, they'll purposely hedge their bets and they'll say stupid shit like this, like, well, in this matchup, Gambit is a favorite, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Roccat win. Like, then you've just covered every possibility, you fucking idiot. There's no draw possible. Someone has to win. So you've made it there so that you haven't really given me any analysis. The real analysis should go like this. Okay, the prediction goes off gut feeling. That's true. But you have to have the analysis behind it that you give before you give the prediction. You always give your reasoning, right? Here's my reasons as to why they'll win and to what will make them win. Even if you then turn out to be wrong in your prediction, it's possible that your analysis could have been correct. And so in that scenario, it doesn't matter what the actual outcome was. Meanwhile, the opposite, here's the key thing. Say you predicted a wild upset, but you didn't give any of the good reasoning and your reasoning was all wrong. Sorry, you get no points for that. All you did there is throw a dart at a map, and where it landed, you were like, something will happen there. Yeah, because you gave me the perfect in here. And listen, you don't have to say anything if you want to be political, Bonnie. I'll give you that out this one time, okay? But that analyst's desk was the perfect example of exactly what I'm describing here, the problem, and what I hate about analysis. Because once it got deep into the tournament, that analysis desk stopped giving analysis in terms of the prediction. Now, they gave the real analysis before, okay? They said, like, I think this will happen in the game, and this is what will happen in, like, rotations and lane matchups. But when it came to giving their prediction, people started playing the game of, like, I want to win the prediction contest, so I'm behind, and so I'll do, like, wacky picks on the off chance that if that happens, then I get ahead. Like, one of the biggest crimes of analysis I've ever seen in esports was the final predictions on the analyst desk. Yeah. The idea that anyone out there who fucking thinks that Doublelift and Crepo thought that Royal Club were going to win that final, like, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn, like, contact me, I've got a sick price on you. They didn't think that shit. So they actually sold you guys out for the sake of the show and for the sake of being, like, Monty being the villain and having it. Okay, that was all cool. But as analysis, just what they were being paid for, they might have given real analysis, but their prediction wasn't what they really thought would happen. And that's like, I'm just using this as an example of like, that's what I don't like, okay? Because that should have been like 4 people saying SK Telecom would win.
And the problem with that, and it wasn't just the analyst desk, it was the interviews that they did with all the pro players. I was literally the only person out of like 8 people that said SK Telecom was going to win. Because let's pretend you don't know the scene. Let's pretend that you're a casual viewer who comes in because you heard about this great championship. That makes a 3-0 by SK Telecom look like a massive upset when all of the experts and all of the pro players are saying that they think Royal's going to win. And I find that problematic personally. I think it mischaracterizes our scene. I think that it makes it more emotional and more like kind of entertainment wrestling rather than a sport, which is not what I want it to be.
So here's what will blow your mind.
If you like WWE, that's cool, but that's not what I want.
I've got an example of exactly what you're saying there. Someone in the mainstream media wrote an article about Worlds, and here's what they said. They literally said it was a huge upset that this plucky young South Korean team won because 3 of the 4 experts picked Royal Club to win. That's totally wrong. We've just given the mainstream media totally the wrong impression.
Exactly. Of course. And of course that's the impression you're going to get. It wasn't 3 of the 4 experts too. It was 3 of the 4 analysts. And then remember they did this other video with a bunch of the pro players where like 3 or 4 additional pro players picked Royal.
Sure. I mean, that's just crazy to me. Especially as, unfortunately, I understand why that happened, which is that not only did people want to be like they didn't want to lose the contest, so they had to have a chance by picking the weird one or whatever, but also, let's face it, people won't like this. But part of the reason why people were so desperate to put on their royal goggles and believe that Uzi was going to 1v9 is that they didn't want the best Korean team, clearly the best Korean team, to win the Worlds and it to have been right that, oh, Korea is the best. That was the main reason for the anti-Korean sentiment, right?
Well, also, I think it was part of the dynamic on the desk where over the course of the tournament, I came in and I didn't really want to be pigeonholed as just a Korean fanboy because I love all teams and I coach a North American team and I watch, nearly all the games from the scenes. And so I know a lot about all around the world. But that was the way that I was pigeonholed, I feel, by the other people on the desk and the way they interacted with me. And so what I was like, well, if this is going to happen, I'm just going to run with it and just go full tilt into full Korea mode, which is what I did. And then because I did that, it created an even bigger divide where people wanted to
curry the public favor, be on that side. Yeah.
Yeah. And like they gave me like, basically they started casting me as the villain. And then I went like full Richard III and like totally embraced that. And then they had no choice but to kind of go against me after that. So I think that was also just a social dynamic that happened over the course of the tournament, interestingly.
I mean, listen, guys, if you want to know the difference in terms of context, let me put it this way. If Monty had predicted a Korean team to win and they lost, everyone in the world was tweeting him like, you don't know what you're talking about. But everyone conveniently forgets like all those games that Doublelift kept saying XDG would win over like Europeans and Koreans and stuff. Like, no one remembers that to this day. Like, remember the time Doublelift was totally wrong about XDG winning and Xmithy's better than Dandy and all the mad shit that he said. Like, listen, the guy's a good player and he sometimes does good analysis, but that was completely off analysis.
Well, and it was also, the desk became much more emotional. That's what I'm saying is I think you're right. I think that overall the desk became more emotional. And I think a very interesting question is if I hadn't done the whole Korean hype train bit, would people have voted for SK Telecom? Maybe.
I tell you when they would have. If the bracket had been different and somehow we'd had Najin Blacksword versus SK Telecom in the final, then they would have voted for SK Telecom because then it would have neutralized the Korean thing.
Yeah, maybe. It's true. I don't know. It was very interesting. I don't know. I don't really understand. I thought a little bit about why all that happened, but I hadn't really fully digested that. But I think that there were a lot of decisions made by both me and other people that made that a more emotionally heated issue. Certainly I, fanned the flames in a very large way, but I didn't come into Worlds wanting to do that. I felt like I was put in that position and I either was going to have to spend the rest of the tournament denying it or I just had to embrace it. And it was my opinion that it was more fun for the fans and more entertaining for me to embrace it. So that's what I did.
Because it's interesting that as a final point, I've got a final abstract topic we could discuss here. So since you said there, the reason why it became like that is that the deaths became more emotional. That's a key thing. In analysis, you should remove emotion entirely. Analysis literally is trying to take yourself out of your ego and who you want to win and who you're pulling for and who would be cool to win and all these things. You're trying to remove them one by one, and you're trying to find just what is the essence behind all my biases of what will actually happen in this game. And if I get to that, then I might find out that, okay, the team that I want to win is going to lose. And if I do that correctly, then I'll be able to accurately say, okay, I think they're actually going to lose this. So, for example, I'll give you an example here. The reason why I'm going to bring this topic up, though, is because I've noticed a trend, which is that people who think in the fanboy mindset of well, since I want this team to win, I have to believe they're going to win, and therefore I have to believe that if you don't think they'll win, that you're a fan of the other team. Because that's a really bad mentality to think that if you're a fanboy, that doesn't mean everyone else who doesn't agree with you is a fanboy of another team. Some people might be doing analysis like this. Because I'll give you an example of where I never do this. Because over the years, I think I've gotten better and better doing this, of knowing when the team I want to win isn't going to win. So I'll give you an example. My favorite team in Korean LoL, you know this, is CJ Blaze. Do you think under any circumstances I thought CJ Blaze were going to fucking beat KTB last year? In the last season. No. As soon as I saw that matchup, I was depressed as fuck. Listen, I wanted them to win. I wanted them to win so badly. But I knew they weren't going to win. I was like, this is over.
Well, my favorite team are the KT Bullets. How do you think I feel?
No, it's the same thing. But you'll have been the first to be no, SK Telecom is going to win this series. It's going to be convincing.
Well, I mean, obviously the summer finals were really close, but by the time...
But by winter, come on.
It was, by winter. And especially right now. And now I'm just sad because the KT Bullets are bad, but...
But that's a key point, I think, to make, is that if you really want to talk analytically, I'm talking to fans as well here, just try that. Okay, listen, you can still pull for the team you want. You can still believe they're going to win. You can still believe, I love Cyanide, so I think Fnatic's going to win. But you have to ask yourself, if I just look at the factors on paper and what's going to happen in the game, who's really going to win? You have to separate the two if possible. Because... I think also another thing that gets done unfairly is that when you do what we're doing here and you change your mind afterwards, you find out that you were wrong, your analysis was wrong, and so you change your opinion to that new opinion, right? Which is what you found is correct. Actually, it turns out that style doesn't work, and that was the one game that showed it didn't. So now I changed my opinion to suit that. That's not actually being someone hopping on a new bandwagon and being wishy-washy. It's there's a famous quote. I can't remember the phrasing, but it's awesome. It's something like, yes, I changed my mind when I find I was wrong based on the evidence. What do you do, sir? Because it's well, whatever you answer there, you're a fucking idiot if that's not your answer as well. That's not in any way being wishy-washy. That's actually how you're supposed to move to the new understanding, Do we have anything to say on this final topic, Monty? Or have I just ranted there?
No, I enjoy your rant. Well, I think we should move on to Korean playoffs. That's what I think.
You want to discuss that now?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. Let me load this shit up. By the way... I realised we just mentioned about Korean bias. First of all, Korea is the better league to even watch. Get over it, guys. Even if you're the biggest Voyboy fan in the world, who do you enjoy watching play mid lane more, Voyboy or nearly everyone in Korea? Get out my face.
Look, and here's the thing, is I totally agree, and I think Riot is doing a great job with esports around the world, and I am all about region locking so that we don't have the Korean invasion of North America and Europe that happened in WCS with StarCraft 2. But on average, the games are higher quality in Korea. The tournament is bigger. It's every game is more impactful. The teams have to, because of it's a tournament instead of a league. Each game is more meaningful, so I feel like the teams prepare more for those individual games and have better strategies. And also, frankly, once you get to the quarterfinals where the top 8 teams are competing, it's a firecracker. I mean, and also all of the pro players from around the world watch Korea because that's where they get a lot of ideas. Not all the ideas, of course. I think that Koreans have their own issues in terms of not being as innovative in terms of picks as some other regions and being resistant to certain powerful champions at times because they have a very safe and a very safe mentality.
I have an interesting point for you on this, by the way, Monty. Here's the interesting point I have on that exact topic, and this is based on my interviews, things that have been told, and I think it makes sense. Okay. Here's how I would describe Korea, EU, and NA relative to each other and how the metagames work there. EU's like the beta version of the game where they add in the new shit and they're just testing it out. It's a little lab of like, we're going to try as much mad shit as we can. Korea watches EU to find out the new weird pick that might actually work. Korea proves it works, and then NA copies what Korea did.
It's actually accurate a lot of the time. Sometimes NA has some stuff, like NA's obsession with Jinx and Ziggs ended up in kind of a world-spanning stuff. So every region comes up with different stuff. And then China, we all know, is like off in Wonderland, like in their own weird mirror universe where nothing affects them ever.
Where it's still season 2 and you just protect the AD carry. No, one thing that's interesting is this is a point that people used to think was a mistake from NA players that actually I'm going to give old school CLG, the retired players, credit here, because I once had a conversation with Hotshot where we talked about the concept of metagame like this and how it changes around the world, and we both came to the same conclusion, which is that even though that CLG was very gimmicky and tried to do a lot of weird shit and tried to play a weird style just to be different, they were actually on the right track in the sense that they were trying to figure out the next step in the curve of the meta and get there first. Because if you're always behind Korea and you've got worse players and worse team play, you can never win. Like, that's one area where Chauster was actually a fucking correct, is that he had his own... Okay, here's the thing with Chauster. He had his own idea of how to play the game, and he never veered from that. If he actually believed it, then he would keep going back to it. Like, no, I think that's wrong. And he was wrong a lot of the time. But the difference is, if he'd have come up with something brilliant, he'd have gone with that, whereas other people would have gone, no, the Koreans aren't doing that, so I'm not going to do it.
The other thing that's very interesting about and specifically, I assume you're talking about all the teleport play that was going on around Season 2 Worlds, is that in a way, even though it was kind of overkill with all the teleports because it cost them too much in the laning phase a lot of the time, the idea of using heavy mobility and playing a rotational style was like a very heavy rotational style was something that no one else was doing at the time and eventually became a more perfect way to play the game. So even though just running a bunch of teleports isn't the optimal way to do that, that's like the ham-fisted way to do it. The idea was correct, I think.
Oh, I think that's a good point to make. Okay, so on these OGN playoffs, okay, first things first, Monty. This is another area, like, in general, okay, I will force people on this show to give real opinions, but if I know, like, people's jobs are tied into it, then I'll give them the out to be, they can say the political thing and I'll just say the real opinion. MonteCristo, SK organization rigged those matches so that SKTS lost to the Prime team, and then they threw that game against K. That's what I think. You don't have to say anything.
Do you actually think that?
Dude, first of all, that team, the Prime team, magically jumped up.
Do you actually think that?
Yep.
No.
Listen, I can't be... Listen, I'm not 100% certain, but if I had to put my money on it, I would say both of those were rigged.
No. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is the advantage of doing that? And actually because if you remember Worlds last year, because the ultimate goal is recognition for SK Telecom as a group, as an organization. First off, even in Korean esports, when there has been match fixing, there's never been evidence that the teams themselves have instigated it. Remember, the whole Savior thing was an issue of an outside party contacting individual players across teams and match fixing. It was never CJ Entis match fixing. Like, the organizations have never been pointed at and definitively said that they've done that. Yeah. Now, why I don't think it makes sense is because last year at Worlds, there were the 3 teams that had won the 3 seasons of champions, right? K has already won. They're going to get enough circuit points to probably go to Worlds. So if you're SK Telecom and both your teams are underperforming, why wouldn't you want S to go? Because S is the team that gets more. If you can only get one team out of groups, you should want S to get out so they have a chance of performing well and getting circuit points, because they got dropped out in groups last season, so that they have a better chance of representing both teams have a better chance of representing Korea at Worlds. Also, S, in my opinion, was never a top 5 team in Korea. They played a silly late game style where they would wait until 50 minutes and they would grind games out with a very limited champion pool. And then they would wait for Horo to make some sort of miracle Baron steal or get a miracle play and then win off of that. People were saying, oh yeah, S is like, they're a top 5 team in Korea. And I was always the one sitting there being like, I don't think so. I actually think that S is hovering around somewhere in the 7 to 10 region, but they've gotten a little bit lucky. So I actually really disagree with you on that. And I think that Prime came in and Prime played, they banned the right champions. They came in with a really good style, and S reacted very poorly. I don't think those games were fixed in any way.
Do you think it was bizarre that play where that Olaf was under that tower, just tanking hits?
Well, the tanking hits actually was because he was charging up his passive. That was my mistake. Because the lower Olaf gets, the faster its attack speed, so he can push a tower faster. So actually, that was a really smart play from SKTS. But thank you for bringing up my mistakes here again. I love reliving those.
Okay.
But
but here's one. Here's what's funny. I actually think that the game between the two SK Telecom things looked more rigged to me. And here's why. I could be completely wrong here, but SK Telecom S in that game was going like with a late game comp, right? That was going to scale well. And then they just surrendered when the game wasn't even vaguely over.
Oh, no, it was over. The game was over.
Yo,
it was over.
No, but listen, here's something that's key about Korean esports. It's really bad manner in StarCraft Brood War to play too long when the game is definitely over and just do shit like if you're Terran, just fly your command center into God. That's really bad manner, right? You're supposed to good game as soon as it's over. But if that was the excuse that you were always allowed around that is if you were in the elimination game of a tournament. And so if you were in like the elimination game of a best of 5 and you were going to, if you win, you could still go to the semis, but if you lose, you're out, then people would give you a lot more leeway there. You wouldn't just type out immediately. You'd see if like the 1 in 10 chance could happen. Didn't SK just type out in this scenario? Like they could have, the 1 in 10 chance was still there, right?
Maybe. But to me, that game looked really over. I was not at all surprised they surrendered.
Also, let me posit a devil's advocate position to your theory of like wanting S to get out of groups. I think SK Telecom know that even if S get out of groups, they're very unlikely to win or even make the final. Therefore, they won't particularly get the points. But here's what I want to say. But if you let S get out and they get beat, you just gave one of the best teams 3 points. Whereas if K get out and they win the whole season, now maybe you keep KTB or someone else from going to Worlds.
If you look at what's been happening so far, and we'll transition this into actually talking about Korean playoffs, but SK Telecom K has not been playing well this season. And I think that the only thing you can say maybe, and I don't think this was either, was match fixing, was the match between S and K, the first one, where they went 1-1. Maybe I can see some semblance of reality.
That did look a bit like sandbagging, like we agreed to draw.
Maybe that was sandbagged. I don't think it was. I am not saying it was. I don't believe it was. But in all of the tinfoil hatness, that is the one that I see as the biggest possibility. But from there, once the KT Arrows like surprised SKTK, and frankly, K played very poorly against Prime as well. They ground out a win, but it was kind of a dirty win. Like it was not pretty. And when the Arrows came around and absolutely destroyed SKTK, and we saw them destroy SKT again in Masters, right? Arrows came in and they split 1-1 with K, but the last game, the Masters match where it was K against Arrows again, Arrows just dominated them. So I don't know. I don't think K has really not had a great season. They're in a slump right now.
That's for sure. Yeah.
For sure. So and here's the thing is when both of your teams are in a slump and they got drawn in against Ozone. And for me, Ozone is a big favorite in the quarterfinals. Ozone is a big favorite.
Well, let's go into that then. So the first match is Ozone versus K. And I think we're going to disagree here because you just said they're a big favorite. I still have SKT winning that series.
That's bold.
So tell me why Ozone are a big favorite.
Ozone is the only team in the world with a winning record against SK Telecom K. They traditionally have done better than anybody else against this team. They also have shown to be the most complete team in Korea right now. with their full lineup, they have not yet lost a game in either Champions or Masters. They have shown incredible diversity in terms of strategy. They've run pick comps, they've run push comps, they've done everything under the sun. They've had great strategic versatility in terms of their 2v1s, 2v1 in mid with Kog'Maw. They have huge champion pools right now, and they're just looking like the most complete team in Korea at the moment. So I give them actually a pretty big edge, maybe 65-35 to them. I think it's 3-1 because we have best of fives for the playoffs in Korea, which is how it should be, in my opinion. And I think that 3-1 for Ozone.
Because here's the thing. I absolutely agree. If we're judging just on form for this season, Ozone is a huge favorite. They'd be like an 80-20 ridiculous favorite, you know. But when I do like the matchup of the players, the only area that SK Telecom K has got worse in terms of players is support. Because
I think Dandy's way outperforming Bengi right now. I think Bengi's in the biggest slump on his team, honestly.
Okay. Well, then maybe that'll play into this then, because the one area I could see SKT having problems just in terms of the matchups is the bot lane is better on Ozone than it is on SK Telecom. So I could see that being a problem. But here's the thing: how does Faker not? He's going to be better than Pawn for sure.
I don't know. Pawn
Impact
is beating
Looper,
Faker.
that's going to be even.
Pawn is solo killed Faker in lane. You don't know. You just don't know. This is a matchup that's historically gone both ways. So I think it's like up in the air. Remember when Pawn was on blue, they 2-0'd SKTK right after Worlds. So I don't know. It's hard. And the other thing that I think is in Ozone's favor is that the switch to 4.5 and the heavy use of teleport, and considering that one of the game that SKTK lost against SKTS, Impact played very poorly with teleport, whereas Looper is like literally the top lane god of teleport. He is the best teleport top laner that I have seen.
No, he's very good. So that's like that's his gimmick, you know. That's what he does well. Oh,
Yeah.
That's another thing as well. People will think this is connected to my Impact versus Flame never-ending debate of like I think Flame's much better, but I think as this meta comes in, I don't think it's just that Impact's playing worse. I think he's just going to fall off a bit after the other one. Like the days when he could consistently be competing for the title of best top laner, I think are over.
Yeah, probably.
And so as a team that weakens them, you know.
Yeah, it does. I just don't see SKTK winning this. Maybe they will. Maybe they will return to their form. Maybe they'll adapt to the new patch better. Because one thing that we haven't talked about with these playoffs, but the patch is a massive change. It is huge. So speed of adaptation, and if somebody figures out something that's like hidden OP quicker than everybody else, then it might cause some problems.
I mean, I wish Ozone was going to win this, because one of the things I love about Ozone is some of their players I just think are awesome. Like, I've always loved their bot lane. Their bot lane's fucking awesome. Like, they should never break that up. Dandy is just a sick player.
I love Dandy.
His knowledge of, like, when the exact buff will be up that he can invade, or to tell his teammate, like, he's at the other buff. He's like, the best at that. I think he's the best in the world.
There's no other jungler that gets into your head as much as Dandy does. Like, he is the king of counter jungling. I mean, he's always in the wrong place at the wrong time for the other team. Like, he's like, oh, I'm going to gank this lane. It's like, nope, Dandy's here killing you.
Well, what's funny is that's part of why he gets so many steals on Barons and Dragons. It's because when someone has the rep that they get so many, you play even more nervously and you do even more weird things around there, and then that just makes it slightly higher chance for him to then come in and do something weird. Like, if you think there's no chance he's going to, then you're just going to play more standard. I don't think it's going to happen as much.
So yeah, I think that Ozone just has an edge. Bengi has just been a non-factor. Cacao has just been all over Bengi in these games, and obviously Cacao is a top jungler as well. But
Cacao was underrated. Let's face it.
Well, I don't know who. I would always say, like, if you asked me, like, for the last year, who are the top 3 junglers in Korea, I would have said Bengi, Cacao, and Dandy.
Yeah, no, but
so
most,
who's underrating
dude,
them?
Most people made it sound like Bengi by far, then maybe Dandy, and then Cacao was always like a 3rd or 4th. He was never getting into that top 2 conversation. Whereas I always thought when KTB were at their top, like, Cacao was second best then for me.
Yeah, he's pretty good. He's pretty freaking good.
Hasn't Bengi's drop off kind of solidified for you? Remember, one of the debates against Faker being the superstar best player in the whole world was this line of like, yeah, but Bengi's so amazing that all the junglers in all my interviews were like, yeah, I think Bengi makes Faker so good. Like the way he plays is genius, and the way and yeah, Bengi was playing genius, Faker was playing genius. The difference is when Bengi drops off, Faker's still amazing.
Yep.
I mean, that's how you know the guy's the best. If even
Faker.
Even his synergy.
There's no question. There's no question. I think Faker is the best. It's really hard to say that I don't know if you could actually make a case. I would love to hear somebody try to make a case that somebody like a pro player is better than Faker. That would be very interesting.
Here's the thing about people like Faker, and I'll use Froggen as well as another example. It's not that these guys are the most skilled and therefore I just say they're the best. It's not that they're the new talent and this is the bandwagon I've hopped on and I'm like, because for example, when Marin came in, I was like, he definitely will not be the best top lane. That bandwagon is like way out of control. Like, yeah, we have no reason to prove it yet. It's that these players like Froggens and Fakers are like the once in a generation players that come along, where they can be good in every meta, they can be good against every opponent, they can be good in almost every composition of team. They're just that much above everyone else.
And the thing about it too, and what makes Faker so amazing is that everybody else on his team can lose their lanes, and Faker will come back and hard carry. There really aren't that in a team game. How many other sports, like team sports, could you say like one guy, like the rest of your team is just underperforming, like they're all getting dominated, and this one guy will just come out and somehow, some way, manage to turn it into a win?
No,
I think one of the best examples of this was the semifinals last season in Champions Winter between SKTK and the KT Bullets, where in Game 3 the KT Bullets were winning by a significant margin, and Faker was playing Riven in the mid lane, and all of his allies were down, all of his teammates were down, and KTB had a huge lead, and then all of a sudden Faker just decides to make all of the Riven plays and win the game. It's like, well, wow, good job, Faker. You just single-handedly won that game.
Well, no, the funny thing is, in a sport, the perfect sport for that analogy, to give for the League of Legends analogy, because you need the team so much, is actually basketball. Because since in basketball, it's not just like, okay, in hockey, if you have the best player in the world and that you're losing by 2 goals, maybe he can just go God mode and score 3 goals, okay? And so somehow you've played terribly 90% of the game, but he overcomes it. Difference is, in basketball, because you're constantly scoring points or defending points, it's almost impossible for one player to just dominate the entire game back. He can't do all the defensive work himself and do all the offensive work and score all the points for a team. An amazing amount of points in basketball for a player to score would be like 40 or 50 points, right? But the team's going to end with like 100 points. He can't score like 80 by himself, you know. That's not going to happen in a normal... What the fuck? Your Skype's just gone off. Why is that?
I don't know.
Oh, God. Oh, it's back now. I think Skype just like went AFK. It's off again. And it's not back in. And it's not again. Right, whatever. I'll just finish this point. At this point, we just have to keep going. I think it's because your Skype... try calling again, because your camera's frozen at the moment.
My camera is frozen. Yeah. Oh, no.
So I'll call you. I'll keep the broadcast going, but I'll call you again.
All right, cool. There you go, Chief.
Yeah, you're back now. Okay. Anyway, that point was quick enough. So we actually differ there. See, people thought we were never going to differ on this show, but we differ there. So I'm going to say
we've disagreed a lot tonight.
Oh, and by the way, I don't think SK are a big favorite or anything. I think, in fact, what's funny is, let me think. How would I logically say? Maybe this is a scenario where I should apply my own logic before of analysis and prediction. So I actually want Ozone to win, but I think SK Telecom. I think it's 50-50 actually, that series. And that's why I have SK Telecom winning, because I just think in best of 5 they get it done. Oh, another factor I'll bring up that isn't ever mentioned. I realise Ozone has changed their mid player, so it's not identical to past seasons. And they've had Looper now for part of a season and now this full season. So the lineup has changed. But Ozone has the most inflated historical record in OGN of any team ever. Okay, the first one they won, when they won OGN Spring, that's totally legit. They beat all the best teams, and they won the whole league. Amazing. The next 2 seasons were bullshit. Yeah, they got the most bullshit draws over and over. Group draws, always insanely good. Bracket draws, ridiculously good.
Right. especially last season. And I totally agree with you. In my opinion, the top 4 teams in the playoffs were all drawn into the same side of the bracket from last season, right? I'm not disagreeing with you. So I looked at Ozone then and I said, this is maybe number 5 in Korea last season. But I look at Ozone now and I think they're number 1. So I'm just being honest. Like I said last season when the brackets were drawn, I was like, well, this sucks. Like all the best teams are on one side of the bracket. Lame, you know?
Well, I mean, the craziest thing is, think about this. If you remember the draw they had in the summer season when they got to the semis and lost, they won their group okay. Well done. The group that had all the crap teams in it, by the way. Then they got to play CTU, that university team, because the university team finished second. Here's who they could have had. They could have had KT Bullets.
Yeah.
Because they can finish second. So Blaze won their group. Their prize, KT Bullets, who go to the final and almost win the whole tournament. So if Ozone plays them there, they go up by 58. So my point here isn't that Ozone's bad. It's just that they've had an inflated record. So, okay, first season, best team. Well, at the end of the playoffs, best team. Second season, they make it the semi-final on it's very questionable they were the 3rd to 4th best team. And then last season, they weren't even close to the second best team. KT Bullets was the second best by far.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, don't everyone think because SKT's dropped off that you can take Ozone's record. Like, well, look how consistent they are. They always make the semis. No, that doesn't work here. You know.
Yeah,
that doesn't apply. So the next matchup,
they are good this season. They are legitimately good.
Yeah. Well, plus, by the way, one reason I love that matchup, everyone already knows I like trash talking. Okay. I think it enhances shit, especially if it's real. It has to be real though. Like I don't like if it's fake.
This is the real trash talking that's going to come though. This matchup is going to produce some great trash talking.
When you saw that translated thing about Imp saying about how his blood pressure rises when people say that Piglet is a better dude, I almost just got I almost had that thing where like on Viagra it says something like if erection lasts over 7 hours, please consult doctor. That's like how I felt like thinking about the next time they matched up because I'm just going to be thinking about it the whole time.
Yep. Yeah.
Also, Mithy told me a quote in my interview with him, my reflections, which made me just get such a man crush on Imp. I can't even believe it. Where he said that when they used to scrim against SK Telecom in Lemon Dogs at Worlds, he didn't understand what the fuck was going on because he thought their bot lane was good because in Europe they'd been the best bot lane, and when they would play against Ozone would purposely pick losing matchups into them, play aggro the whole time and yet not lose. And he was just like, what is going on here? Because Imp just doesn't give a fuck, dude. He's just
that's what's great is that Ozone definitely has swagger. They're the cockiest team for sure. And it's not just Looper is not this way and Pawn is not this way, but Imp, Dandy, and Mata, oh boy, those guys have an attitude.
I even thought that was the one factor they had going for them in that final versus SKT. Everyone else in the world, including probably Dade, probably thought, well, we're not going to win this final. I actually think Dandy and Imp were a delusional in a good way to think they were going to win. We can do this, dude. I think I can probably wreck this Piglet guy. I'm better than him. He's the best AD carry in the world. I'm... The fuck did you say to me, motherfucker? My blood pressure. And Danny really thought he could outdo... I really think they believed that shit.
I don't know what they believe, but definitely. Ozone is a very fun team. They've got a lot of personality. And Imp and Mata, it's always fun to watch them play for the reasons why Mithy said was that they're the biggest all-inners, the most aggro, insane, just 2v2 you all day, every day lane.
So the next matchup is, in my opinion, the most boring of the whole playoffs. Samsung Blue.
It's going to be the most one-sided too.
I mean, who cares about
Samsung Blue is a heavy favorite. Heavy favorite.
I mean, what's going to be hilarious is we made the joke that the team who represents Korea at the All-Star tournament could have gone out in group stage. Well, it's going to look even more retarded when the two players who represent them individually aren't even the best at their roles and went out 5th to 8th in OGN playoffs when Mad Life and Shy go.
Yep, and also when SKTK loses and goes to All-Stars as the team representing Korea when they get knocked out in the round of 8.
And also when my lovely Flame makes it all the way to the finals, proves himself the best top lane. That's just going to look silly there, Come on, guys. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. I don't know who's going to win that match. Okay, so I think Frost, come on. They can't win this match. How can they?
No, they're probably the weakest team in the round of 8.
I mean, I'll give them...
Samsung Blue looks really good right now. You got to remember, too, that Acorn and Heart are having a great season. Acorn is on top of the KDA for top lane, not only in Champions, but in Masters as well. Like, he's been so good, so consistent. And Heart had some amazing games on Thresh as well. And their strategy is looking really good. Dade is actually looking good. Dade is back to being able to play Ryze in the mid lane and crushing people with it. He played Ryze into LeBlanc and just owned. So, yeah, it's looking good.
The problem is Dade was clearly like a comfort pick player, where if he didn't have the comfort pick, his level dropped insanely. It's not that he just wasn't on a champion he was good on. Also, he seemed like he was never confident on some of those other champions.
He also tilts really hard, I think.
Well, I mean, just look at that haircut. Right, anyway. Katie Arrows, CJ Blaze. What do you got for me, Monty?
I think this is actually the hardest to call.
Why?
Because when the KT Arrows are good, they're amazing, and when the KT Arrows are not on form, they're really bad. They're like such a crazy inconsistent team right now. So I think.
And are you really going to go and tell me that Arrows will win this?
No, I think the safe bet is Blaze, but I think the Arrows, if it just depends on which version of the KT Arrows we see. If it's like God mode KT Arrows, then if the KT Arrows play at the level they play against SKTK and they can keep that level through the whole playoffs, they will win this tournament. I don't think they can. I think they're too young. I think they're too new, and I think the inconsistency will continue. So I take Blaze here, but the Arrows are the dark horse, man. Like, they have insane skill when they play well. And they definitely can win this tournament, but they have to play at a high level every game, which is something they haven't shown they can do yet. So
if this was LCS Korea, then Arrows could win this series because it would be best of 3. But the fact it's best of 5 makes me actually quite certain that Blaze will win. Now, I don't think it'll be without incident. Like, I think they'll lose a game, but I think they're going to win this 3-1.
The problem with Blaze is that, well, earlier in the season, they looked like they had picked up in the early game. They're now falling back on a lot of their bad, like, split push until late game habits. And so that has me a little bit worried, because it's a very weird matchup, and that the Arrows can play so ridiculously aggressively in the early game, which is what Blaze has been moving away from, which isn't good for Blaze, I don't think. They're not using Daydream to the fullest potential. Daydream versus Kakao in terms of crazy aggressive junglers, though, should be fun to watch.
Well, I think the X factor for this series listen, it's a bit like the Coast scenario. I know that Flame is going to be like the shifter, okay? With their style of play especially, he's going to get big, he's going to do well, and if it goes late, he can potentially carry, okay? I have no worries about him. My primary X factor for this series is mid lane. Because if it goes 1v1, Ambition's better than Rookie, okay? But if Ambition falters, that's where KTA can win, I think.
Well, interestingly, Ambition and Rookie have a very similar champion pool as well. So we'll have to see if they pick up anything new due to the 4.5 changes. It's very weird, though. So it's a really weird matchup between, like, the probably CJ Blaze and Naj and White Shield are the teams that love to drag it out to late game the most. And KT Arrows are definitely the most aggressive team in the bracket.
So the last matchup, White Shield versus KT Bullets. And I think this is very interesting to call. So I think we're going to disagree here. Who do you think's going to win, Monty? Shield or Bullets?
Shield. I think
we're going to disagree again. We're going to. This is where I'm going to possibly sound like a total idiot, okay? Because even worse than the SK Telecom one, I'm going to go against all form that's happened recently and say that I still think KT Bullets will win this series. And here's why. 2 reasons. One, the way they played at IEM, admittedly not against Korean teams, suggests to me that I think they have a bit of Gambit in that sense. Like, they have like a bit of that clutch thing where they're going to get it together when it's like a big best of 5 type playoff scenario. I think they're going to be better than they were in the group stage. But more importantly, I think Shield has actually been overinflated in terms of how good people think they are on the basis of the group stage and the Masters results, especially Masters. Like, I think that made Shield, what you saw, because they got to play so many games, was when they had their really good games, they looked awesome. Like, wow, this could be a new top team. But I think if you take into account all their games, I don't think they're as good as people think they are. But I'm guessing you're going to disagree with me on this.
It's the thing about Shield is that Save and Gung are so good. I think Watch is not performing up to his old level, and I think their weakness is particularly Gorilla, their support player.
No, he's the biggest weakness for sure.
Zephyr is okay, but their bot lane has issues.
Their mid lane is a stud.
But here's the thing: is they don't. Yeah, their mid laner and Save, their top laner is really good too. He's saved them in a numerous situation. He definitely lives up to his tag. But the KT Bullets, Mafa and Score are not a very aggressive duo, so I don't think they're going to be able to take advantage of Gorilla and Zephyr in the way that, say, Ozone could. So that's interesting. But yeah, I think Shield still has an advantage here because the thing about Shield is, in spite of their weaknesses, they are very intelligent when it comes to map movement. They've got their rotations down. These are guys that have won games that they really shouldn't have just to outmaneuvering their opponents. And in a lot of ways right now, Naj and White Shield we've been making comparisons, but they're sort of like the Cloud9 of Korea, except if they had a better, instead of their star player being their jungler, their star player was their mid laner.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, that's what's funny is that's the one thing you could have never predicted, is that you would have thought that the sick rotations would depart with Nofe, who was the guy who in theory was leading a lot of that shit, and you would have thought his jungle style has some sort of effect on it, and actually they actually stayed or even got better at rotations. They might have even improved over the season, right?
They've improved, yeah, they've improved. And they have a better early game now because their jungler is more mechanical.
So where is the mismatch in terms of this series? Does KT Bullets have a player who's going to be mismatched?
I mean, I think that Gung is a little more reliable than Ryu at the moment.
On a basis of what? Just form, champion pool? What?
Yeah, just form and champion pool. And obviously Gung's been going nuts recently.
Well, listen, you sound very confident here. You sound like a man who wants to tell me that Shield's going to win 3-0.
No, I don't think so. I think actually Shield will win 3-1 or 3-2.
Okay, so it's a bit closer than you thought then.
Yeah, I think the blowout's going to be Blue 3-0 over Frost.
So then what percentage would you give on Shield winning the series? What's the line?
65, probably.
Okay. I mean, I can't say that Bullets is a favourite. I have to put them at minimum 55. Underdogs or 50-50. Yeah. I think, yeah. I mean, that's the one that I'm the least sure on. That one actually is one where the analysis probably does edge it to Shield, but I just think that Bullets is going to win it somehow. I just have a sense about that.
I don't know. I mean, I think that the Blaze, if we go back to that one, is a safe bet. But I really look at the KT Arrows and I'm like, this team is huge when they play well. They are so good. And yet they're also just so off because they lack experience. But the Arrows are such a threat. They're like that team that if they catch on fire in the quarterfinals, that they could just totally roll this entire tournament.
Okay, but that's a key point. That's one of the reasons why some of my predictions here will seem off to people who watched OGN this season, because they'll think we are not taking into account their current form. But actually, historically, and this is just a trend in esports in general, but I've noticed it in League of Legends as well. Historically, form in the terms of group stages doesn't translate directly into playoffs.
No, and especially because we've had, especially if you look at champions as a tournament, you look at teams like Naj and Blacksword that have won. You look at teams like Samsung Ozone that have won. The only team that has really translated in the last couple years their success in the group stage into a championship has been SK Telecom K. Everybody else has been third in the group stage or, barely squeaked into the playoffs, and then they caught on fire in the playoffs and just rolled through the tournament. So I think KT Arrows are the highest likelihood of a team to really surprise people. And of course, you could say, well, yeah, they already have surprised people. They're 3-1 against SK Telecom K this season. Well, they also lost 0-2 in very embarrassing fashion to SK Telecom S. And they've just been they've looked either really good or really bad and really nothing in between. So it's a matter of can they figure out why they were losing quickly enough to make a deep playoff run. I don't think they can, but it's an outside possibility.
I mean, I'll give you a good example.
But honestly, if they beat Blaze and they can beat Blaze in a best of 5, they jump from underdog to maybe tournament favorite. I'm not joking.
Well, no, when you consider the level Blizz should be considered, yeah, sure. The one thing, though, to give a good example of what I mean about how the group stage form doesn't always translate, the perfect example is the hype that was around Zenix Storm last season. Zenix Storm won their group, admittedly a bad group, but everyone said, oh, they're playing so well, when they play Najin White Shield, who got beat by Ozone and who maybe aren't that good, they're going to beat them. And if you remember, White Shield won 3-1. All the close games seemed to go their way. Like, actually, the hype was totally not there. Like, that's one of the things that I worry about with both of these teams is that, like, I find it hard to put confidence in the players on KTA because aside from Kakao, no one has experience going deep.
Yep.
No one has experience under pressure.
Team. But this is also an extremely exciting team. And that's what's so fun about the KT Arrows is you look at their age too. Someday and Rookie are like the two youngest members or like two youngest players and champions, I believe. Rookie is definitely the youngest and Someday used to be the youngest. So I think he still is towards the end of that spectrum. But this is such a young team. And they are already showing these glimmers of greatness. And if they can just get a little bit more experience, like maybe they're the SK Telecom K of this season, where SKTK was in spring of last year, where they show up, they have some good performances, they take third, and then they come back and with a vengeance in their second season and really just dominate. But this is really an important team to watch, I think, and is very exciting. So we'll see how they do.
Well, here's how I'd set that up then, because what you're actually correct about there is because they're young and they're inexperienced, the one way that works in your advantage is when you haven't had a problem yet, right? So that means you it's like I was describing like Dandy and all in before. Even if Bengi and Piglet were better, as long as you actually retardedly think you're actually better, it gives you a slightly better chance to just maybe pull the upset, okay? So in that sense, if KTA come in and they're on fire and in the first games they're just playing awesome really well, they'll be like, well, no, we're going to win and we're going to do this, it's going to be fine. The real problem I see is if Blaze is super solid the first two games and they just run into a brick wall like, and they're down 0-2 or it's 1-1 and they felt like they should have won two games, that's where the questions get asked of the newer players and where they have to like, how do they respond to that? What do they do if they played really, really badly in one game? What do they do if they had the right picks and they had the right advantage and they lost anyway in that game? That's where like newer players, that's what experience does for you. You know what to do in those scenarios.
Yeah, and that's where you're absolutely right. That's where the KT Arrows have been faltering, is that they don't know what to do in those scenarios. So they have to get that experience, but it's just like SK Telecom K was. You look at this team where they've got some standout players. Rookie mechanically is insanely good. Just look at the comparison between the teams, okay? So you have basically on SKTK, you had Impact, who is the veteran player, has been around League of Legends for a while. You have that with Kakao, right? And then you have a lot of young talent, solo Q stars. Sunday's been on the bench for a while, but he hasn't really been in there too much. And then you've got Hachani, who's actually looking pretty darn sharp right now. Arrow, who has a little bit of experience as well from Zenix Storm, made the quarterfinals last season, but definitely highly mechanical players. So you get one veteran who's been on a winning team with good strategy, and then you build these kind of minor pros with good mechanics around him. I don't know. I just think it's going to work really well eventually. Maybe not this season, but that team is solid. It's very solid.
Right, I'm going to do a test here because I think to close up what we'll do, since we're doing it live, like the whole point of doing it live is so that we create the illusion that people can actually interact with this show as opposed to me and you just talking to each other. But let's actually make that work. So here's what I'm going to do. We'll take 2 questions from chat, but I want MonteCristo to open the chat. Or actually, wait, message me on Skype if my guy who's moderating the chat is actually watching this now. Because if he's watching it, he can do this for us. Let's wait like 30 seconds to see if he responds. Because if he says yes, he can take the 2 questions for us. Because I'm not going to read that fucking chat. I know how toxic you fucks are. I'm not going to let you have a direct, unfettered access to my eyeballs with your shitty minds. That's not going to happen. I'm going to stay here behind my lovely wall.
Thor stays pure.
Yeah, exactly.
He stays pure in his room with his coat on in the cold.
You see. Okay, well, I've got to... Can you take 2 questions, Monty? You just pick the best 2. If you say anything mean to MonteCristo, I'm going to fuck you up, chat, next time. So start sending questions to MonteCristo now. He'll just pick the 2 best. So he'll pick one now and then keep submitting and he'll pick another one. And if it's retarded, he's not going to pick it. Like, if it's like, why you suck so much Korean dick? Like, well, we're not going to answer that. First of all, that's a very deep topic that involves a lot of breaking down of his history.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I see my psychiatrist for that, guys. You're not going to help me. I can't even read it. It's moving too fast. Oh, wait. There looked like there may have been hope for a good question. I'm looking. It's hard. You made this difficult for me, Thorin. Ask questions about the playoffs. That's what this entire show has been about.
Come on, chat, get your shit together. There's like thousands of you, and you can't get one good question together.
Dude. I just can't read them because the chat's moving so fast.
Okay.
And then when I scroll up, I can't find any.
Copy paste a bunch of it in a notepad or some shit.
Yeah, that's an idea. All right. Okay.
Do we have anything salvageable?
I'm looking. Oh. Yeah, this is actually a decent question.
Okay. Throw it at me.
Patch teams. Do teams like CLGU and Azubu Frost from Season 2 fall off individually or due to meta changes? I think this ties into a better conversation about what is a great team, right?
Sure.
Because we touched on this earlier, but are there teams that are patch teams? Probably. I think Ozone last year in 2013 was definitely a patch team. They hit their high because of the certain Zac and top lane initiation tank changes that made look better than he would otherwise.
Well, and Daddy getting to play Zed every time didn't hurt.
Yeah, that's true too. And Jace and Rise and Mid-Ezreal and all the other stuff that he played. CLGU and Azubu Frost. I wouldn't say Azubu Frost was necessarily a patch team or CLGU, but they were very tied to a Season 2 meta, and certainly they fell off afterwards because of their reliance on laning phase and team fighting when everybody else adjusted to more aggressive pick comps and rotations. Like Season 3 Worlds was all about pick compositions. It was assassins everywhere, and that was just not a style. But I think when we look at teams that we might start, it's very early on in League of Legends to declare anybody great. But clearly, the greatest team so far in League of Legends history in terms of consistency is SK Telecom, T1K, and maybe Gambit.
Sure. In fact, I think Frost's third after that list.
Yeah, Frost is third.
I mean, 3 OGN finals in a row. You can't fuck with that.
Yeah. So that was important too. But yeah, these teams definitely had some level of versatility. So yeah, I don't think Frost was. I don't think CLGU was necessarily a patch team either.
I think I have something to say on that though. Like,
sure.
Here's the thing. When I think of Frost, the biggest problems Frost faced was Rapid Star and Cloud Templar's decline. And so I think of it like this. Rapid Star himself seems like he couldn't survive past Season 2. Like,
yes, this is true.
Rapid Star's like playing Karthus, he's playing Anivia, these sorts of... You don't play this shit in Season 3 or Season 4, that's gone. And he couldn't survive in the era of all the super good mids, okay? So he was done. And remember, he used to be actually one of the focal point stars of the team almost when they were doing at their best, in like the summer of 2012. Then Cloud Templar... His style, he really seemed to fall off when you got the more aggressive, more mechanical junglers like rose up and used that low econ style. Like he really fell off. I mean, we can obviously equate him to some degree to like a Snoopy, where like when you had that more and an odd one where when you could just play those supportive junglers, that was their shit. That was what they were all about. I think CLGEU is more of a... I can't say they're a patch team or whatever, because they are still one of the greatest teams ever. They're definitely in the top 10. They're probably like 6th or 7th or something, best team ever.
Agreed.
Agreed. I will say that they were weird in a sense that it's very rare that an all-time great team literally is based around a gimmick. And they were based around a gimmick, and the problem was, it's not that that stopped working, it's that it didn't work as effectively, so they could no longer be elite level. Listen, what people forget is in the LCS summer split, when Froggen was refusing to play some of these assassins, and Wicked looked like he dropped off completely, and he wasn't playing any of the new champions, and their bot lane looked like the mechanics had just gone to shit, and Snoopy couldn't play any of his supported junglers. I've just made every single scenario worse than it was in Season 2, right? And they still almost qualified for Worlds. They still picked it up at the end of the season. They still almost made it in third. In the first split, they finished third convincingly and beat SK and just narrowly lost to Fnatic in the semis. They weren't bad. They were still like they were like the fourth best team in Europe. But the difference is when their strengths weren't there, when those had been cut back a bit. Now their weaknesses came up forward, but none of their strengths could counteract it, so they couldn't be elite level anymore. Because if you remember, here's a key thing about CLGU that people forget. What made them amazing is because they had the one strategy, the gimmick, and they knew that was their strategy, and they played it to perfection because it fit all the styles of every player on the team. That made them incredibly consistent. But I made this point in my article. It also gave them less of a chance to win tournaments because they only had the one style. So as a result, they only won one tournament ever. No, they won two tournaments ever. Lone Star Clash versus like fucking Curse. And then the DreamHack where they surprised Moscow 5. They never won another tournament ever. They were amazing. They made semifinals, finals. They couldn't win though.
This reminds me a lot of, Blaze, your favorite team.
Okay.
The one-trick warhorse, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're the same. They're where they'll make
and again,
runs.
it's not that it doesn't
They're
work.
Always good.
Yeah, it works. It just isn't the best anymore.
But it can't win tournaments. That's the thing, because there will be a team that will figure it out to counteract your strategy, and you become too predictable.
Or you get the unfortunate scenario where your big strength, it's like we've been discussing already. If your really big strength is like, oh, well, we're definitely going to get Flame super farmed up and he's going to carry the whole game. It's like, okay, well, we'll plan that that's what's going to happen. And we'll build our whole thing about we shit all over your bot lane, or we constantly 2v1 top lane, or we just take the mid, or whatever it is. We're going to give you your big strength because we're not going to exploit all your weaknesses. And you're telling us what your weaknesses are by telegraphing what your strength is, You aren't versatile. Whereas if you look at the teams that have survived, Gambit is super versatile. Even though they have a weird sort of gimmick on the team fight style that still use, the weird thing about their team is it's almost like with Gambit, no matter what the meta is, 3 out of the 5 players it works for them, and then the other 2 it doesn't sort of work that well, right. And then but it shuffles around, and they always have the players.
And they're also very progressive on picks, and sometimes, of course, Diamond famous for picking up new jungle champions and builds that are very effective and being really a world leader on that. But also they have all these weird pocket picks that they'll just randomly pull out at times. It's like, oh, we feel like using Xin Zhao. Like every so once in a while, Diamond's like, I'm playing Xin Zhao this game. And it doesn't matter if nobody's played this champion in like 3 months. He's still just gonna like pop up with it and surprise you. So.
Well, that's another thing is that, okay, everyone only makes fun. Everyone only tends to notice the innovation of Gambit to make fun of when they do it wrong. So Genja's doing a weird build where he's now going Zephyr second on everything. And then Diamond has a period where he's like, I think I'm just going to play Skarner all the time. It is season 2, right? And you're like, no, Diamond, it's season 4. Please pick Evelyn again. But whatever, right? But no one gives them credit when they get it right. The key, it's like that discussion I had before about how CLG did have the right mentality. If they could have got ahead of the curve, it would have evened things out against the Koreans. And the reason why is when Gambit gets it correct, you see that's why they have these spikes in LCS where they'll come back for a week and they'll look super strong. Because they'll figure something out, and for that week where they're ahead of everyone, no one else has it. So they're ahead in some sense. Diamond's got his brand new Evelyn build where, we were told it wasn't going to work if it wasn't AP, but he just goes straight into like hybrid attack damage style. Now it works again, and he's making it work awesome, and he's using the Elder Lizard one. The weird thing about them is that they do have that innovation factor that I don't think any Western team has had to the same degree. No Western team's innovated as consistently as them, even if they've innovated incorrectly at times,
Yeah.
So they always have the option of jumping a little bit ahead in the meta, whereas no one else really does that. I can even think historically, especially not with that consistency, All
right, I want to take one last question.
Yeah, one more question.
Let's see here. I'll take a controversial question that I know you'll love. Why do you think Riot sticks to best of 3 and not move to a more double elimination like the International 3 with Dota 2 that Valve does? Well, first off, we're talking about best of 3. There are 2 different questions here: best of 3 and best of 5, or double elimination. You're probably not going to do both.
No, actually, the international is best of 3, but it's double.
Yeah, best of 5 double elimination is like a ridiculously long tournament structure. So,
okay, well, listen, I'll lead this because, again,
thank you.
If anything, I need to protect you, Monty, but I say the ridiculous shit, so you don't have to say it, and then you just come in with a reasonable add-on, and then everyone's like, that Thorin's just an asshole. Meanwhile, Monty thought this the whole time, and he was just pulling the strings from behind the scene. He's like the Moriarty in this scenario, and I'm just being set up to be done over. Anyway, let me think about the way that question was phrased. It wasn't like, why doesn't Riot think best of 5 is good, or why doesn't Riot think double limit? It was, why do you think Riot chooses best of 3? Now, I like that question, because now I'm going to be able to give you this answer. And you forced me to say this, by the way, questioner. I would have just kept this to myself. I would imagine Riot probably kind of cynically thinks that it would be good if the chances of a Western team, particularly an NA team, getting further in their tournament, the World Championship, which in the past has been held on NA solo as well, they would think that's a good thing. And I would think they would structure things in that way. I don't believe, even though they will claim that they philosophically believe on every level that best of 3 was best for the round of 8 and that buys were a good thing and all these things, I don't think their logic holds up. I've tried debating with some of these people and they break on the stand instantly and they start looking to their lawyer like, no, I plead the 5th. Like, they don't have anything, dude, when you get into them. So here's the thing. I think they wanted the chances of C9 to beat Fnatic to be higher. I think they wanted potentially someone like Gambit to beat Naj and Blacksword and get to the... Whereas that wouldn't have happened in best of 5s.
I think they wanted... I think they wanted upsets. I think they definitely wanted upsets in the best of 3. That's what I think. I think that best of 3s are good for creating upsets. And I think that was the love of the underdog is something that Riot likes to encourage with their formats. I agree.
But here's the interesting thing. That's not even bad. Like, okay, everyone must know I'm a purist in some sense, okay? So to me, I want the sport to be as hard and as pure and just the integrity of the competition to decide who's the best, okay? That's why I want formats that really encourage the best team winning. But if you are willing to say, like, I'll give you an example. The sport of MMA is a sport, and in theory, they portray themselves as that. Like, we always give the best challenger the title shot. But that's not true. That's a lie. Sometimes there's a scenario where the best challenger, clear-cut, in his division, is actually a boring fighter who people don't tend to buy pay-per-views of. And so until he overwhelmingly proves it, like he wins like 5 contenders matches, they won't give him the shot. What they'll sometimes do is give a really exciting underdog guy who's the 3rd or 4th best fighter, but who maybe has knockout power, they'll give him the title shot because everyone's going to tune in to see that because they know at any time, even if he's getting owned, he could just knock the other guy out and that would be incredible. Or like an old fighter with a really big name. So if you want to go the WWE route, just admit it. That's my main issue with a lot of Riot things, okay? I don't mind what you're doing. You can have your reasoning, but don't lie and tell me it's one thing and then do it another way. So if you just said, listen, I want there to be a better chance for Western teams, I'd be like, well, there's nothing I can say. That's just what you want. But if you tell me, no, I think this is the best tournament format, now I'm going to have umbrage, you know.
Well, hopefully, I have hope for the next World Championship. To Riot's credit, they've hired Nick Allen and Frank Fields and these other guys who worked at IPL, and everybody loves the IPL 5 format because they thought it was the most fair. I love the IPL 5 format. Do I think we'll ever see double elimination in Riot Tourney? No, because I know a lot of people at Riot really don't like double elimination. And to be fair, most sports do not use double elimination, so I understand where they're coming from. But I think that the resulting, because when they hired Nick Allen and these people from IPL, it was probably too late to change the World's format last year. But I have hope that due to these hires in the esports department, that the format for Worlds this year will be improved.
I even have an interesting downside that I don't think they understand, which goes like this. When you promote upsets have a better chance of happening. But as a result, you actually dilute the quality of your semi-finals and final. And that's the key thing. Because actually, the aim of a tournament organizer, in my opinion, really, should be to try and have the final be the best possible game and have that be incredible. So that then when you do book out Staples Center, it's going to be a thing to remember. It's not going to be like a one-sided stomp. Now, here's the thing. When I think back in the past, I think there's scenarios where this sort of mentality has cost them. Like, for example, in Season 2, when the Western teams, CLG and Gambit at Moscow 5 at the time didn't need this advantage that they were giving them now with the best of 3 to have a chance to win, right? They actually could have beaten their respective semi-finalists. And I actually think if it had been best of 5, that Moscow 5 would have beaten TPA. That can be a controversial opinion, whatever. Think about this. Imagine if Moscow 5 had made the final and they'd played Frost. That would have been the best series maybe of all time.
Oh my God. I agree.
That would be the perfect matchup, and it would be incredible. And it would have been the 2 champions of each of their big regions meeting, and that would be the shit.
Yeah. Also, even at Season 3 Worlds, it's my opinion that had Royal and OMG been a best of 5, that OMG would have won and made the finals. And I actually think that OMG SK Telecom final would have been much better.
No, that would have been the matchup again. Like, actually, what's funny is that particular... People are going to say, how can you say that? Because it was 2-0. If you remember how that series went, that was one of the games that made me think, like, best of 3 just sucks. Because, okay, first game, Royal plays incredibly. They win really heavy. Second game, it wasn't like a stomp. There's just a key point where OMG's losing. And because they know we're in a best of 3, and if we lose this game, it's over, they sort of had to, like, panic and just start making, like... weird plays that didn't work and then just losing, and Royal just stuck with the plan and they just grinded it out and they won the game. Whereas in a best of 5, it doesn't work. Like, the beauty of best of 5, okay, is for really world-class teams, the score is actually misleading compared to normal sports. Because in a normal sport, if we play one game and I'm down like 20 points at half time, it's very unlikely I'll win, right? But in a best of 3, in a best of 5, if I really am better than you, it doesn't matter if you win the first 2, because each game's separate. Right. So I win game 3, I win game 4, I win game 5, I win.
And also, if we objectively, I think, take a look at some of the best League of Legends series of all time, or at least the ones from Worlds, what was the best series? It was Najin Blacksword versus SK Telecom, where SK Telecom was the better team. You're not going to convince me that Najin Blacksword was anywhere near SK Telecom, but because there was a best of 5, when they were down against Sword, when they were on the ropes, they were able to come back.
Oh, by the way, if it was best of 3 like Season 2, Najin Blacksword would have played in the final.
Yep.
That's if that doesn't fucking seal the deal for everyone right there. Like, Jesus, come on, guys. And also, Royal would have just stomped 2-0 over Fnatic, so again, that would have been a shit semi-final there.
Yep, exactly. And also, just best of 5s make for much better adaptation. You look at the story of what I consider the best of 5 that has ever happened in League of Legends, which was SK Telecom versus the KT Bullets in Champion Summer 2013 finals. And KT Bullets had a brilliant strategy, and it took 2 games for SK Telecom K to catch on and then turn it around. But it was amazing.
No, that series actually proves my point of what I was saying about how momentum doesn't exist in the way you would think it does in best of 5. Because KT Bullets did the shit. They did exactly what they needed to do the first 2 games. But then because SK Telecom was gradually catching on to it, they were then never going to win. Because then game 3, 4, and 5, SK Telecom now has the advantage going in all of them. Even though they're always down on score. At all times, KTB only needs the 1 game to win. But they can't win a game now. It's ended at the point where they could win a game.
It was an amazing series. It's an amazing series.
That's the thing. I think we could resolve this whole problem like this. Even though the question was about why does Riot do it, and I'd give the obvious example there. And let's face it, by the way, they're probably... Listen, if Riot is being like the WWE and they're servicing their fan base and giving their fan base what they want, then they've done exactly the correct thing. Because the majority of fans do not want to see a Chinese team play a Korean team in the final. They don't want to see the semi-final ever be all Asian teams. They want to have a Western team, an NA team and an EU team there to cheer for, and that's their story.
Which is hilarious, actually, because if you look at the global audience for League of Legends, it's actually majority Asian. So in effect, if we want to talk about what is best for the game as a whole and the majority of the game's viewers, it's actually for a Korea versus China finals, just because the populations that watch in these countries that watch League of Legends are enormous.
That's the key thing, though. I think that Riot gives more credence to the NA scene over all the other scenes. I think they get priority. They think of it as like, this is our game and this is where it's from and this is the fans that we're catering to and these are the ones we see every week at LCS. I don't think they ever think, wait a minute, there's like 80 bajillion people in China who play and watch this game and would love to see this final.
The best thing, probably, hilariously enough, for League of Legends would be a China versus China finals.
Well, it's like another funny thing is, Someone once made that point where they said that world spots, a way to divide them would actually be to give them based on how big your player base is. Now, what's funny is NA is going to think, oh, cool, well, we're North America. We have 300 odd million people. We're going to have lots. No, Korea has like twice as many players as you. Korea.
Yeah, which has 50 million.
It's a fucking one country.
Yeah. The Korean fan base is enormous. It's just tremendously large. I mean, for example, the first day of Masters, just a regular group stage day at Masters, first day of the new tournament, it was ranked 4th on Korean television at the time.
Dude,
that's not even counting the stream numbers, right? That's just TV.
When I was there in Korea, one of the games I went to see was the opening game of OGN Summer, and it was like these are the teams who played. Okay, it was like Najim Blacksword, like Ozone, and then the two Zenix teams, Blast and Storm. So at the time, like, who gives a fuck about any of those teams except Ozone, right? The place was packed to the extent it was standing room only heading out of the door for the shittest games in the whole tournament, you know. That's like the level of fandom there is there. It's nuts. So yeah, in general, here's the thing. If you want to make a real debate, like just on their merits of what format is better, the problem is the Riot format is terrible. The only two options that I think can legitimately be argued for is either best of 3 but double elim or single elim best of 5. Those are the two ones. The problem with the Riot one is you're stuck in between. You've got the disadvantages of both.
I really think that this year's Worlds is going to be nearly identical to a Season of Champions. I think it's going to be 16 teams because we don't have the All-Stars thing this year, so it'll be 3 Chinese, 3 NA, 3 EU, 3 I'm missing a region, 3 Korea, of course my region, probably 1 Southeast, maybe 2 Southeast Asia, actually. 2 Southeast Asia, and then like 2 wild card. That's probably, if I had to guess, they'll do 16 teams, split them into groups of 4, put the first place winner of NA, EU, China, and Korea all in different groups, and then divide the rest of the teams based on that. Then do a double round robin into a best of 5s in the quarters.
And by the way, that would be awesome.
By the way, that is literally exactly a Season of Champions right there. Like,
to see double round robin with, like, basically that one of the stupidest things that Riot did was the buys. Because what you did there was you said this: see this team, they're the best in their region. We're going to give them a chance to play only 2 games at our tournament if they lose. Cheers, mate. I didn't want to see the best teams playing anyway. I love to see the shit teams play all their games because that's what I watch World Championships for. Yeah. Well done. Whereas, obviously, you want to see the best teams play as much as possible.
Or, to be fair, if you know American sports, American football does give buys to the top teams. So,
yeah, but American football is also like a super fatiguing game where, like, you can only play 1 game at a time. You can't play like best of 7 in American football, can you?
No, you can't.
Whereas nerds can play 1 million games in a row. You know, it's not a problem. And this shit takes place over like 2 weeks. So, like, come on, fatigue isn't an issue.
Yeah. I agree. It's okay. I think, like I said, I think the format for Worlds this year is going to be changed. I don't know this for sure, but I do believe so.
Also, fatigue also is never going to be an issue as long as you keep those wild spots around, because those wild cards are basically just like, you guys have a free, here's a target range, just see who gets the highest score. Just like, those teams are never going to win games off anyone good.
Yeah, true enough. All right, we've been doing this for a while. I think we should wrap up.
Let's shut this mother down. Okay, so any final words?
No, it's been fun. Good playoff predictions. EU playoffs start in less than 12 hours, so that'll be cool.
Oh, by the way, for the playoffs in Korea, I purposely only did the quarterfinals because the difference in Korea, here's another thing that's better about OGN, is that they don't all take place over 3 days. They take place over like a fucking month. So we're going to have loads of time to talk about the semifinals once we know what they are.
Oh, yeah. Obviously. Like, it's going to take us 2 weeks to get through the quarters, so... Yeah, this weekend, next week will be all quarters, and then we'll move into semis and third place match and finals after that, after the All-Star break.
Like, that's another factor we didn't actually talk about in the playoffs. We didn't really need to that much in LCS, but a factor that does exist is that factor of, like, let's say someone like, let's say CLG beats Coast, but they do it in super narrow fashion, and they have really big throws, and they know they, like when Gambit beat Ozone in that tiebreaker, you know that look on Alexic's face, like, Jesus Christ, what am I doing? I almost lost the game there. So even though they got through, he couldn't feel confident, okay? He was like, my team's playing like shit. If that happens, the problem with LCS format is if you see Doublelift's face as he's walking off screen, and this guy's shook as fuck, man. This guy's just like, I'm not holding it together here. He has to play the next day versus an even better team who are like one of the best in the league.
Also,
he doesn't have a week to figure it up, you know.
The games are of generally lower quality because as a coach, I have to plan for 3 rounds of a playoff in one weekend, and I don't even know like who all of these teams are, depending on how the other brackets shake out and everything like that. How do you do that? You can't.
Well, here's a fact
you
for you.
can't prepare for your opponent.
Let's go back in time. Here's a fact. Remember, there's 3 rounds of playoffs in OGN as well. Here's a fact. Blaze would have won OGN undefeated if it was OGN Spring and LCS format. Because MVP Ozone wouldn't have had a week and 2 weeks and all the rest of it. They would have gotten to the final maybe, but then Blaze would have just done the same shit they'd done to everyone else the week before and wrecked them.
Yes, because it was that brilliant strategy that Ozone came up with because they had time to come up with it that caused them to win, right? They came in with, and that was, you know, as good as some other series was, I think in League of Legends history, that the Blaze versus Ozone final was maybe the biggest upset.
It was the best
Although
upset as well, though.
TPA over Frost was a pretty big upset too, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ozone 3-0 over Blaze was the probably the biggest upset and also the biggest strategic coup. Like they totally had Blaze just dissected, figured out, and they destroyed them. And it was especially impressive because nobody else played like Blaze. So how did they practice, right? How did they practice that? That was really that blew my mind, was like, well, nobody else is playing like Blaze. Nobody else has this style. So how do you practice? How do you scrim? How do you prepare for this? And they managed to do it, though. It was impressive.
Okay, so the file at the moment is at 666 megabytes. So I think that's a sign that we need to get off this mother now. So let's just end it there, right? Goodbye, everyone.
Remember the beast. Good night.
We'll see you next time.